Dude, did I like semi-doxed you earlier? My bad, Destiny.
Wait, how'd you doc? Oh, you mean when you talked about my friend's Twitter account?
Yeah, I was like, I'll be streaming with Haas and Destiny, and I put your, your at, and then
You're
everybody in
fine.
the thing was like, bro, you shouldn't have done that.
You're fine. Don't worry.
Yeah, don't worry about it. It's
What
a
did you,
meme at this point.
perhaps I'm behind the times here, but what did you get kicked off Twitter for?
So I actually finally got an answer to this. So the problem was for inciting like violence against like groups due to race. So I debate a lot of like alt-righters, and a lot of them are like were like white supremacists who aren't really white. So it's kind of strange. Like people like Nick Fuentes or like another guy called like Braving Ruin or Tara McCarthy. Like a lot of these people like aren't like fully white. So I don't understand how they like argue in favor of a white ethno state. And I think the tweet that got me banned was I had a picture of like all three of these like white nationalists that weren't like 100% white. And I tweeted something like the new alt-right ethno state is shaping up to be more diverse than a Disney Channel original movie. And I think that like they read that tweet and they were saying that like even if I'm not racist, like I can be inciting people to hate people because of their race. And so I got banned for that. Yeah.
And what's so annoying is that if people on the right, these right-wing commentators were actually principled, there would have been like a massive social media outpouring and outcry in favor of you.
Oh no, they were all happy when I got banned. They all celebrated.
It's not just that, but they also then turn around and execute these like targeted doxing campaigns and comb through your tweets and stuff. One of the most recent examples that I can think of is what Mike Cernovich used to do, and I think he kind of gave up on it now, but remember with the pedophile stuff with James Gunn and even Sam Cedar and a bunch of other people that he went after.
Yeah, exactly. They got Sam Cedar fired. Eventually he got rehired, but they got him fired. And like they did this social media mob campaign to try to get him fired. And it's like, wait, weren't you guys just screaming about how it's like, whatever, pick an example. It's messed up that Roseanne got let go because she tweeted some politically incorrect stuff. It's like,
please don't say that. Oh God, it was so much more than just politically incorrect.
No.
I know you're trying to make a point, but God,
I agree with you. But I'm saying that they will, whenever it's somebody on their side,
yeah,
they'll
there's
say
no
like,
principles.
No, you should be allowed to say like really edgy stuff, bro. Like, what are you talking about? But when it's somebody on the left and they get banned, it's radio silence. It's crickets.
Yeah.
Not only is it crickets, but sometimes they like actively do that. And one can make the argument that they're taking advantage of how easily duped liberals are when it comes to this sort of stuff. And I think this is definitely an avenue that Kyle and I and even you, Destiny, will agree on. I think that there is definitely something to be said about how frustrated liberals get and how quickly liberals get frustrated at things and mobilize even against their own without looking at like any sort of context.
You ever heard of like Reset Era?
Me?
No.
Yeah. Oh, it's a big like left-leaning forum. It's really funny how torn those people are up on me. Like half of them talk about how like I'm basically like a racist bigot, and then the other half are like, oh, well, he's actually pretty chill. It's just really funny reading it. It's pretty insane.
I didn't even know what Kotaku in action was until they.
Oh God, that cancerous
until they
subreddit.
came for me, Destiny, because I, as you said, made fun of a second wave feminist or something, whatever her deal was. The one that was very upset that racism was ended by a Mortal Kombat character in a fictional ending of a video game.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's. I think everyone's just a bunch of babies, really, realistically speaking.
Destiny, you made a good point about this. You said that you used to make the argument of like it doesn't, like, who cares? It doesn't really matter who the like main characters are in video games or whatever. That doesn't mean anything. But then as soon as they started putting like non-white male characters, all the other people who made that argument suddenly flipped and were like, whoa, why are you changing it? And you were like, that's when you realized.
I realized I was a useful idiot. Yeah.
Yes, because you were like, I know, because I was making the same argument of like, it doesn't matter, so why not have a black lead or whatever? And I thought that was a really good point because it just lays really plain their hypocrisy.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes me feel like a moron. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's not like, I don't think that's your fault. And I also think, and I'm still like this on the free speech issue. I know you might have some disagreements with me on this issue, but my whole thing is that I've always like outflanked the right wingers on that issue, where it's like they think they're pro free speech. But my whole thing was like, no, you're actually not pro free speech. If you look at Donald Trump, who you guys supported vehemently, this is a guy who sued Bill Maher over a joke he made that he didn't like. This is a guy who keeps threatening to quote.
Talks about expanding libel. Yeah, it's stupid. I don't know. People are fucking, dude. Oh god, conservatives that support Donald Trump and then want to say free speech are so stupid. Like watching them like try to like maneuver those conversations is fucking embarrassing. I feel bad for the person. Like, ugh.
Yeah. You don't feel bad. They have no morality.
Like, I think that changes if to the extent that there were any people who actually cared about that issue and believed in that issue. When we lay out that case, I do think it changes some minds. And I also think that, you know, your debates, particularly on the issue of race, have definitely changed minds. And I think that you're actually a good case study for what I've argued for all along, which is it's better to engage even with these insane people, because all it takes is one instance of popping that bubble where they think they're all so right about everything. And then somebody who makes a cogent case on the other side, it gives them pause and you plant a seed. And it always takes a while. Like, I feel like a lot of people have a naive view about deconverting people on the right. And they think like, if it doesn't happen immediately, what's the point? And it's like, no, you could have a situation where you planted some seeds. And then next thing you know, they might go from watching one Destiny video to 12 Destiny videos. Then they start watching some Haas videos. The next thing you know, all of a sudden they're on to ContraPoints. They're on to David Pakman, Kyle Kulinski, Jimmy Dore, and you just kind of slowly open up that door. But they wouldn't have even known that this world existed unless you went into the lion's den in the first place.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, as long as you do it in a responsible way, not like in a Dave Rubin way or a Tim Pool way, I guess. I don't know where you stand on him. Yeah,
well, I think that's really important too. Like having a conversation with someone is one thing, or like having a debate with someone is one thing, especially if you try to get to the bottom of what they believe in. And don't just sit there and agree with them like a fool, which is what Dave Rubin does a lot. And I think that's because he's a dishonest actor, and I think we all know that at this point, right? I mean, I don't think.
Yeah, that's what I was actually just about to say. That I actually really dislike assuming bad intent in people, but Dave Rubin is one character who I'm totally comfortable saying like he's doing this for all the wrong reasons, and I think he's dishonest.
Yeah, I do this all the time. Are you familiar with the term Hanlon's razor?
No, I'm not.
Oh, yeah, it's basically don't ever
read 3 books before we started this conversation.
No, I read Wikipedia articles. That's all I do.
Dog?
But Hanlon's razor is the idea that you never attribute or you never assume malice where you can equally attribute stupidity. Basically, like if you could explain something by somebody just being real dumb, then just do that rather than assuming they're like an evil, dishonest actor that's trying to like destroy people or whatever, right?
Okay, well, let me stir up the pot a little bit by asking both of you guys something then, because I think as far as what Destiny just said, I think you and Kyle might be in agreement here and in contention with someone like myself, but Sargon of Akkad, is he dumb or is he racist?
I think he's dumb. I really don't think he's racist. He just says so many things that are just so unbelievably dumb.
Yeah, I think he means and believes everything he says. I 100% believe that. And I think he actually, over the years, he's actually shifted further and further and further right.
I agree. When you look at his before he got banned off of Twitter, I don't know if he was trying to troll or what, but he was starting to tweet some things that really made me think, where I was like, wait, is this actually like the Sargon pivot to the alt-right? Because some of the stuff that he was tweeting, I think it was like in relation to like trans people, and I think maybe the Jewish question, I think he tweeted a couple things. I wish I could remember the tweets exactly. But yeah, when I started to read those, I was like, oh shit, I think Sargon is like heading for the worst. So I do agree that it seems like he's probably moved a little bit more right, but he just got banned off Twitter again, so I haven't kept up with him recently.
And you know, it's crazy because Sargon and Dave Rubin and a few others, their numbers on YouTube, their subscriber numbers, shot through the roof during the Trump era, like right when Trump got elected and all the way up through until now. But my thing was like, I was looking at that and I was thinking to myself, like, it's like a temporary, you know, injection of support that's going to peter out, especially for a guy like Rubin, because I don't think he means a word of what he says. And you can only fool people for so long, because the more he talks, the more he's going to contradict himself, the more he's going to show himself to be silly and, you know, not actually interested in the issues. So
and even the more
guys,
uncomfortable you'll get with your own fan base. Like you see,
he's an ideas guy, okay? He just likes ideas.
Bro.
Chill, guys. That's what he wants. He just wants ideas, like phrenology.
He has one response to every time he gets cornered. That's his one response. Is like, me, bro. I just care about these ideas.
Have you guys seen the Sky News video at this point, where like the guy kind of keeps subtly dunking on him by showing like they show the Anna Kasparian footage of Anna shitting on him, and then his like
and then he becomes a human cartoon of himself.
Yeah, even his fans dunk on him quite frequently, which is hilarious, but not in a way where like, you know, my fans or Destiny's fans shit on me in good nature, but like he genuinely is not respected even in the right-wing circles, and yet he still tries to maintain this illusion that he himself is anything but a, you know, cookie cutter conservative at this point. And
because he's a Weasley prick, man. He's so Weasley. Like, he doesn't even answer the questions and ask me anything. Like, anyone he doesn't like, he'll...
Yep. True.
Yeah.
Facts.
But yeah, I mean, the other thing about Dave Rubin, of course, is that the Colette article, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Colette, but it's like I would say it's like the magazine for, if you are a white academic who greatly enjoys like how beautiful the Nazi uniforms were, or if you want to talk about the different phenotypes and haplogroups, like that's the intellectual racists magazine, the IDW's favorite magazine. And they wrote an article that was rather like, you know, rather moderate. I didn't even think it was like egregious at all, where they called Dave Rubin a conservative, and he lost his shit all over Twitter for like multiple days. He was like, "You're disparaging me. It's really silly that you're doing this. I can't believe that you guys are calling me a conservative. I'm not." Even though he considers himself a libertarian now. He said he was a classical liberal, but now he's a libertarian on the Joe Rogan show, despite the fact that he can't even bring up any like libertarian theories. And that even Joe Rogan dunked on him.
It's always funny to listen to people that call themselves libertarians ask them like, "Oh, how do you feel about open borders?" And they're like, "Oh, I'm way against that." I was like, "Oh, interesting. So you're a libertarian. What does that mean exactly?"
Yeah. How is that any different than like a conservative?
Stefan Molyneux, he actually used to argue for open borders, and then now he's obviously gone full, you know, pro-Trump, like...
He's gone past that. He's way past that. Yeah, with that Poland shit, holy fuck.
Full white nationalism now. But the funny thing about Rubin is that he's literally threatened to sue people for libel for calling him a conservative. And this is the same guy who spends like every other show yelping about free speech. And then he threatens to sue for libel.
Do you know what he's doing? The funny part is he's virtue signaling. They just don't want to be called conservatives. So they literally like super pretend that they're not to virtue signal that they're like Democrats or liberals or not. I don't know. It's really fucking weird, but like that's what it is.
Why not just be honest? Like just be honest about what you are. I don't understand the whole silly tap dance that they're doing. I mean, I guess it's lucrative, so that's one reason, but it always struck me as like, I don't understand why you wouldn't just wear the badge. Just say you're conservative. What's the big deal?
It's not as profitable. These people are very comfortable. They exist in the same circles with like the Bill Maher's of the world and whatnot. They want to also keep making money, but also have the glamour of being a part of the elite and you know, hang with the Hollywood socialites and whatnot. So that's why you have to maintain the illusion that you're like a rational, reasonable, centrist person, and that you just happen to always agree with conservatives and conservative policies. And that way, and as Dennis Prager correctly pointed this out directly to Dave Rubin's face when they were doing a fireplace chat, he is a useful puppet for the right. Dave Rubin is more useful as a centrist or, you know, as a liberal even, than he would be if he was a conservative, because he's not very intelligent. So
yeah,
once you become a conservative, once you're tarnished that way, what is he going to do?
It's always frustrating for me too, and it works because like when I have to debate like people that are like alt-righters and shit, it always looks like I'm the extremist because I always have to run through like 50 dumb fuck centrists first before I'm like, hey, this is like some fucking alt-right shit. And they're like, well, hold on, you know, is it really that all right to just talk about the fact that maybe black people have the warrior gene? I'm like, yeah, it kind of is. And they're like, well, I don't know. And now I look like an extreme leftist because I have to run through all these people that call themselves centrists who are like unironically like defending people. Yeah, it's really frustrating for me.
Yeah, the race thing has always been super weird to me because I never, like, for somebody to even start going down that path is such a foreign thought to me. But I mean, what would lead somebody down that path? Because the original thing that always pops in my mind is, honestly, it's like an old school Marxist type argument, which is it's super easy for the ruling class to basically do divide and conquer by getting middle class white people to blame middle class and poor black and brown people for their problems. And so while they fight amongst themselves, the owner class runs out the back door with all the money.
Yeah, it's literally like you live down the street from like an Amazon warehouse and you're making like $40K a year as some broke as fuck family. And like Amazon paid no taxes last year and like they're billions of dollars profits. And you're like, that fucking Mexican over there that might be using an EBT card, that motherfucker is taking all my money. It's like, what the fuck? It's so fucking crazy, hilarious to me that a whole bunch of poor people will point fingers amongst themselves while the wealthiest people are getting like so absurdly wealthy. It's like, don't you guys think like this is really stupid? Yeah. Ugh.
Yeah, that's always what struck me about it, is that it seems like a masterful move from the owner class to just kind of get away with everything. And
I guess. Yeah.
I mean, there is like literal historical basis to what you're talking about. I believe in the Reconstruction era, when before Jim Crow laws were implemented in the South, black people actually were starting to mobilize alongside white workers that were also poor. I think it was called Purple Party. I don't want to misrepresent this right now and like pull this out of my ass, but they literally instilled like racial anxiety or racial animosity within the white working class. Ta-Nehisi Coates talks about this too. The concept known as "at least I'm not an N-word." Like that's the that's always been at the heart of like racial anxiety that white people feel in this country, so that they never look up. They constantly look down and they constantly punch down, because if they were to mobilize together and realize that we are all allies in this, that we all have had a shitty hand dealt to us by virtue of not being born into a baron's family, basically, that we should be allies. We should be fighting against this organization, the way that people have organized our economy. It is truly unfair.
And I think it's always been a weird contradiction to me that you have conservative types. Very often, they love to bring up the idea of individualism. And it's all about like, hey, I'm all about personal freedom and I'm all about personal responsibility, and forget the collective because that's like lefty nonsense. Let's talk about the individual. And then in the next breath, they'll start talking, collectivism when it comes to race, and they start talking about group differences. And it's
like, oh my God. And the people that will do this, like I feel like even Stefan Molyneux do this. In one breath, he'll be like, identity politics is the cancer rotting our political discourse. And then in the next breath, look at the beauty of Poland's white culture. Like, wait, what the fuck is it? Like, what do you want? Do you want to talk about identity politics or not?
Well, again, Stefan Molyneux literally started off, as you guys pointed out, his career by presenting himself as a libertarian philosopher, misrepresenting his position on both of those accounts because he's not a philosopher. And I think he was like, at some point working in like childcare or something, which is genuinely a horrific thought to even consider. That man was like near children. But I remember a very famous debate that he had with Kokesh, who is somewhat of a libertarian, where they were talking about the virtues of borders, and Kokesh obviously was on the other side, but he still like somewhat ended up agreeing with Molyneux's support of Donald Trump, and his reasoning, his justification for why borders were a necessity is truly abhorrent, and that is because IQ differences amongst races, and that we should be making sure that the American gene pool is as clear of that problem as possible, because IQ leads to a higher likelihood of committing crime, like lower IQ.
What a piece of garbage! There are videos of Stefan Molyneux years back when he was libertarian, basically saying that people who do believe in borders are almost by definition racist, and he's done a total 180.
Oh yeah. Well, that's because he actually was like an actual libertarian. Yeah.
Yeah, but even those people, like, don't get me wrong, libertarians, there is common ground with leftism and libertarianism on like foreign policy issues, for example, on drug war issues. But even those like Ayn Rand types, I just always felt like, you think you're a genius. You read like 2 books. You read two Ayn Rand. You read like Atlas Shrugged, and then what's the other big one?
Yeah, one's fucking fiction too. It's not even like, I mean, it doesn't have a lot of theory. It's like a cool guy who also happens to be like selfish and libertarian, like sick.
This is like in the perfect world. This is what my ideology would look like with fictional characters, pretty much. Yeah. Or Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged, and the other big one. Fuck.
And it's like
the Fountainhead, I think.
Fountainhead, yeah.
I mean, I went through like a little bit of a libertarian phase at one point, but if you don't get out of that at some point, I mean, it's one of those things where it's just like weird college contrarianism of like, well, what if selfishness is actually good, bro? Have you thought about that? And
maybe taxes are theft. Like, holy shit, yeah.
You know, taxation is theft, even though you get something back for it. But of course, profit, or what to do with the profit, what to do with your own surplus value that you've generated for your capital owners, that to me, that's not theft at all. That's just normal. That's something I truly don't understand.
I think Chomsky makes great points about this when he says, and this kind of opened my eyes to this and my mind to this when he laid it out. He said, we're supposed to be like a representative democracy, but then where you spend most of your time at your job, it's basically a little tyranny, because you have the boss, you have somebody above you who can basically call all the shots. So that's a giant contradiction in our system.
So Kyle, you have that perspective, but you yourself wouldn't consider yourself a democratic socialist, right? Or are you? If I'm not mistaken, I think you're also a social democrat, right?
Yeah, I'm more of a social democrat than anything else, but there are little elements of post-capitalist philosophy in my ideology, but I'm not fully post-capitalist.
Do you want to elaborate on that? Why?
Well, sure. So for me, it's all about the tiny element of post-capitalism in my philosophy is very simple. It's worker-owned co-ops. So I'm totally in favor of worker-owned co-ops. I think that, and the Labour Party in the UK, to their credit, has spoken about this in terms of like laying out policies that incentivize worker-owned co-ops. And I think that's totally fine, and I'm totally in favor of that. But I also think that there actually are plenty of examples, and I know because I personally was one, of people who, I wouldn't mandate every business by law has to be a worker-owned co-op, but I'm okay with worker-owned co-ops existing, if that makes sense. Because there are people who just kind of want to show up, clock in, clock out, and then go about their business. So I don't think hierarchy is bad by definition. I just think that it can be bad in certain circumstances, and we should obviously ameliorate the ills that come about as a result of the current state of capitalism that we have right now.
Yeah, wow, man, especially because like currently that distinction robs people of political agency, right? Like not having access to wealth or not having any control or any autonomy over your own life in the workforce significantly, I think, contributes to a lack of motivation to join political discourse in a meaningful way, or even activism in a meaningful way. And I think that's part of the reason why when labor unions were strong in this country and we actually did have a labor force, there was a lot more, like the Democratic Party's hand was essentially forced to work with those unions and actually present like protective legislation for American workers. And that's completely gone. It's obliterated.
I totally agree with that, but I also think that point you made about labor unions, that speaks a little bit more to a social democratic philosophy, right? Would you agree with that?
Well, labor unions?
Yeah, to have like
I mean, but just like you mentioned, like anarcho
back against management.
Yeah, anarcho-syndicalism and which is what Chomsky believes in, or which is what like Richard Wolff also talks about quite frequently. Like this understanding is still rooted within Marxist principles. It's all about changing the current asymmetry of power between those who have and those who have not, or the owner class and the worker class, like you mentioned.
That's correct. But I also think, I think that struggle existing is necessary, but I'm also skeptical that we can ever get to a point where that struggle totally goes away.
Yeah, I just I don't know. That's why that's why I have a hard time considering myself like any specific form of a Marxist or whatever. Whenever people try to like figure out what I am, or they ask me and they're like, "What are you, a tanky?" Like what Progressive Voice calls me all the time. It's just I do understand a need for centralized planning to some degree, especially not in like a USSR sense, but centralized planning with incentives and even subsidies in a similar fashion to what we have currently. Because even if we were to force every single every single corporation to become a cooperative, it would still be susceptible to market forces, and therefore competition would end up depressing wages, especially if workers were to democratically decide on exploiting other nations or even themselves to some degree in order to remain competitive. And then there would still be that inappropriate dynamic. Whereas I feel like production is supposed to focus on necessity and even, even abundance to some respect, or even luxury goods. I am also a luxurious boy. I like my luxury items. So I don't know.
Well, I think that's where, like, that's where statism comes in a little bit, because, there are like anti-state forms of leftism, and then there's statist forms of leftism. Because if you look at, like, the Scandinavian system, basically what they've done is they've taken certain things off the table and then made it so that, like, outside of that, we can have competition and an economy that's somewhat based on that. So in other words, you guys know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about healthcare's off the table, education's off the table, including higher education. You get a certain amount of guaranteed leisure time per year. So it's like, once you take the basics off of the table, I actually think it's totally fine to have some level of competition and market forces kind of dictate where your system goes, because I actually do kind of buy into the argument that there is something in human nature that you can't ignore, and you can't just like wash away by wishing that human beings were like purely good and purely altruistic. I think we have to work with both the altruistic side of human nature and then also kind of harness the competitive side to positive ends.
Wait, have you ever read like Zizek's stuff on like a necessity for the state and how too much democracy can be like rather overbearing, for example? And that there is a little bit of freedom.
His stuff. I've seen his stuff on the 2016 election, though. I saw that.
Yeah, no, we all agree on that stuff. Like saying that Hillary Clinton and neoliberalism is the real problem, because that form of compromise has allowed someone like Donald Trump to become so powerful. That stuff we all agree on. I'm just more interested in like the theory element, because you said human nature, and I somewhat agree with you. I think we're selfish beings, and in order to combat that, we need to have like maybe not an authoritarian structure, but a democratically elected structure that still takes care of all of the boring things that we don't want to take care of. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm a fan of like a constitutional democracy. I think having a constitution is super, because that's where you can kind of lay out those things that are off the table, both things that are negative rights, but also things that are positive rights. And obviously, I think European nations have done a better job laying out things that are positive rights, because the view in the U.S., of course, is that when you look at the U.S. Constitution, it's more about, hey, here are things the government can't do. Like the government can't lock you up for saying stuff that's political or whatever. I forgot where I was going.
Wait, hold
with
on.
that.
Someone said I needed to call Hasan out on something.
What's that?
Oh, Zizek said he would vote for Trump over Hillary. Is that true?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
He
no,
did.
I don't agree with that. That's true.
Okay.
He did say that. And then he said, oh, just kidding, after too. But, it's still a bullshit take to have.
He had what I call the backlash theory, which is that if Trump gets elected, it will get so immensely bad that the left will rise up quickly, and that left with teeth will then implement many more positive radical reforms because of the backlash from Trump. Now, having said that, I think that all of the empirical evidence that we have proves that he's wrong, because just take the Bush years, for example. George W. Bush is a war criminal. He was, a deregulator and a trickle-down guy, and he was wrong about virtually everything. But the reaction from the Democrats was not oh, now we're going to go even further left and we're going to drag the spectrum back to where it should be and we're going to implement all these awesome policies. The reaction from the Democrats was, now let's meet Bush halfway and go further to the right. So I think that he's a little naive for thinking that that would be the dynamic at play. If anything, when we see far-right figures in the U.S. get elected, they do nothing but move the Overton window even further to the right, which of course is detrimental.
Yeah. But a part of that is also because we haven't had before, like pre-Bernie Sanders, the American left was almost completely divorced from any sort of socialist pressure, any sort of trade unionist pressure, like any sort of true leftist pressure. And I think that's why it is a necessity to have even somewhat more radical elements within the left have a voice at the table in order to reshift the Overton window back to a reasonable place. And as a consequence of that, bring about positive legislation that will genuinely, even if it's marginally, genuinely improve the material conditions of working class Americans and the lives of working class Americans. So that's why I don't have like a anti-tanky stance that Destiny has. I mean, obviously I don't engage in like, genocide denial or anything like that. There is definitely a line I draw at like historical revisionism and things of that nature. But if there's like a Marxist-Leninist perspective, I definitely do agree it should be heard. I see it as like, and this is in no way comparable morally, but similar to the Tea Party. People are always like, well, Bernie Sanders like the Tea Party. The Bernie Bros like the Tea Party of the left. Okay, look at how fucking successful the Tea Party was. Now, of course, there are different conditions. Like the Tea Party was not the Tea Party was not posing any sort of serious threat to the status quo. The Tea Party was also half astroturfed with Koch brother funding and financing. It also capitalized on a lot of racial resentment that is much stronger in this country than any sort of class consciousness ever was. So those were the advantages of the Tea Party. But no one can sit here and actually claim that the Tea Party, which essentially created a Freedom Caucus in the House that even forces Trump's hand to go further right at times, is not successful. And Trump, in many ways, took advantage of the Tea Party messaging, and I would even go so far as to say he's the Tea Party president.
Yeah, I think that's all true, and I totally agree with the point of like having people to the left of you being involved in public life and even running for office. I've said it on my show before. I would vote for somebody who's significantly to the left of me, because just because those are their beliefs and their ideas does not mean they're going to get the whole canon of their policy platform implemented. In fact, quite the opposite. You're only going to get a very tiny percentage of that implemented. So I'll just give one example now. Like the UK healthcare system, according to some studies, is the best healthcare system in the world. And they are like fully socialized medicine in the sense that you have taxpayer money, so public funds going to public hospitals and public institutions. So there's like no private ownership of that stuff. So that's the fully socialized system. Now, I would support that, and then the compromise position from that, once you go through the dirty process of actually governing and legislating, the dirty compromise from that is, well, let's do a Medicare for all system where you have public funds going to private hospitals and private clinics and private, healthcare facilities. And I think that that's the benefit of having people to your left in the conversation and to your left fighting for those goals, because you could shoot for the stars and maybe you'll get to the moon. So that's the whole philosophy of this is just going to happen when it comes to governing and legislating, that you almost have to go further. And that was always one of many problems with Obama, is that he started the conversation by saying, let's do a public option. And then, well, no, that should have been like the last ditch compromise effort. You started with let's do a public option, and you ended up with let's do the Heritage Foundation's healthcare plan that was originally, Mitt Romney's and Chuck Grassley's and Newt Gingrich's healthcare plan. And, the results were not great. Obviously, any reform further to the left would have been preferable. So this is a lesson that Democrats haven't learned, but I think they haven't learned on purpose, because they're also, funded by Wall Street, funded by military industrial complex, funded by pharmaceutical industry. And it's a shame, because look how popular. All it took was like one election cycle, and we saw how popular real lefties can be. Like when you look at Ro Khanna and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar, they're some of the most known, and they have more like social media following than anybody. because they're actually fighting for things that are popular. And look at how much support you can get when you do that. And of course, you get the ire of the right, and they strawman you 24/7 when you get to that point.
But who gives a shit? That's fucking great, dude. That is awesome. That's always good. Because, like, remember, I mean, I know you covered this as well. When they were, like, originally vilifying AOC and saying, like, oh my God, look at her, she's a socialist. Look at her plan. And they would bring up her agenda, and it was like, you know, make sure we take care of the elderly.
Oh, that Fox News picture! Holy shit! Yeah.
Fucking, there's
it was like living wage. Yeah, healthcare for all. It was like so. Oh my God, free college education. Yeah, holy shit.
It was an ad. It was an ad, man. It was great.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's truly great. Obviously, the left still has a lot to overcome. The left has to fucking first fight off the Democratic Party. This is something that I know you and I will have a kick out of talking about, like the DCCC's blacklist. How do you feel about that as someone who is one of the founders of Justice Democrats? How does that make you feel? Because it boils my fucking blood, dude.
Wait, can you explain this? What are you talking about? The DCCC blacklist.
So the DCCC came out, I believe, a couple months back, and this was right around the time when Nancy Pelosi was like wilding out a little bit and saying certain things, like you know, it's starting to criticize, like starting to be very vocal about, or starting to be very dismissive about AOC and the policies that they were pushing for. Just like Kyle mentioned, very popular policies, and. After that, the DCCC secretly, and I think The Intercept first reported on this, secretly came out with a memo stating that any consultant or any staffer that works with any Democratic opposition that is interested in primarying incumbent Democrats is going to be blacklisted, and that they won't be able to work in these establishment institutions any longer.
So in other words, half the time, out of one side of their mouth, they scream about unity nonstop. We got to unify. We got to be Republicans. We got to be Donald Trump. Unity, unity, unity. And then they turn around and say, oh, yeah, anybody who's on the left flank, we're excommunicating you, and you have to be an establishment figure in order to get any support from us. And then they
unity
also
just
say
means agree with me, right? That's what they mean when they say unity.
Also primary Ilhan Omar, who just won. So it's like, wait, you said primaries are bad and you like unity, but now you want to primary somebody. And the whole point was primary her from the right. So in other words, listen, it's asymmetrical warfare. And Haas, that's the thing, is that for me, this wasn't I told you so moment to everybody in the movement, because I feel like even though they have the best of intentions, many of them are super naive. And they felt like, well, no, once we get in there and, you know, we can get Pelosi to come around on certain issues. And I was super clear from the beginning. She is not your friend. She's your enemy. She's going to gaslight you every step of the way. She's going to tell you, oh, yeah, totally. I support what you're doing in theory. But no. When it comes to, like, you know, the nitty gritty of actually legislating this stuff, like take a back seat and sit down and I'll take care of it. And then, of course, she's going to stab you in the back at every step of the way. So my whole point was, and again, this is a lesson that has to be learned, and it's a principle that needs to be abided by. I don't even care if you're on the left and I look at your policy platform and you're right about everything, and I agree with you on all of your policy positions. That's maybe not even half the battle, because really the more important thing is, do you have any idea how to go about getting that implemented? And especially for a president, if you think about this for a president, like all of the presidential candidates on the Democratic side who are on the side of, and Elizabeth Warren's a great example of this, I like a lot of her platform, but her whole thing is like, well, listen, we can, like, all the Democrats generally want to end up in the same place when it comes to healthcare. So why not work together and compromise and get it done? And it's like, well, first of all, no, the Democrats are not all on the right side. And no, compromising and holding hands and singing Kumbaya and trying to get in a time that is not normal. You cannot use normal procedures to go about getting this done. So you have to be on the side of, I'm going to twist arms, I'm going to play politics, and I'm going to have an attitude of, if you don't do what I'm telling you to do, I'm coming after you. And you know who did this really well? FDR. You know who else actually did this really well when he wanted to? Lyndon B. Johnson.
Okay, but for the record, if we're going to talk about FDR, again, the conditions were very different. But more importantly, this is something that often does not get mentioned. FDR had tremendous amounts of pressure from trade unions and also the Communist Party and socialists that were way more effective and had actual influence in governance at that time. So they were like, hey, you have two options here. You either fuck this entire thing up and there is a violent revolution and America becomes communist in the way that we want it to be, or you implement some social democratic reforms and you actually force the wealthy to pay their fair share.
So Haas, you're making my point for me. That's exactly what I was going to say next, which is, and Bernie's indicated that he kind of gets this in a way that I don't think the other candidates get. He's saying like, no, like even if I'm elected, I'm still going to need all of you, and you have to be involved, and you have to be ready to march if necessary, pick up the phone and make, and go after it. And also, I think he knows, and again, something Obama did not know at all, if somebody in the Democratic caucus is not going to support your legislation, in this instance, let's say Medicare for all, here's how you handle it. You call them into your office, you sit them down, and you say, here's the deal. If you vote for this piece of legislation, you have my support. I'm president. I just got elected. My approval rating is way higher than yours. Congress's approval rating is what, 19%? Your approval rating is what, 20 some odd percent, 30 some odd percent? If you're lucky. Okay, well, here's the deal. I'm more popular than you. I will come to your state and I will campaign against you for a primary challenger if you vote against my legislation. If you vote for my legislation, Medicare for all, and if you play ball, well, then it's all fine and dandy. I'll make sure I support you the next time around. So you make a decision. Your political career will be over if you vote against Medicare for all. That's what you're faced with right this second. So you make that decision. And you have to scare these people, man. You have to play politics. You have to get dirty to get it done. You have to wheel and deal. You have to apply political pressure. And I feel like so many of the candidates on the Democratic side, even the ones that mean well, like Elizabeth Warren, she's ultimately super naive about how to actually get stuff accomplished.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely correct. I forget who pointed this out earlier, but I was listening to a podcast, and I forget who it was. Whatever, it doesn't matter. Someone was saying that Barack Obama and his his campaigning was about, all right, I'm gonna get elected into office, and then you guys give me the keys to the castle, and then we're saved, right? Everything is good going at, I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to bring America together. There's no red America or blue America. It's a purple America, all that fun stuff. And, we're going to figure it out together by deliberation and by compromising with the other side. And you guys don't need to do anything. Whereas Bernie, on the other hand, understands, and this is something that I truly love about Bernie Sanders. He's like, this is not about me. This is a much larger movement that is much larger than myself. And our work begins the moment I step into the office. And this is something that I try to tell people all the time in my chat as well. It doesn't stop when Bernie Sanders is president. That's actually when everything begins. There is going to be a need for direct action and mobilization and activism to push the Democratic establishment at every step of the way once Bernie Sanders is president. It doesn't stop.
Yeah. That's all true. I totally agree with all that.
Yeah. What do you think, Destiny? I know electoralism bores you a little bit, but this is definitely one of the things that I truly appreciate about Kyle, is the amount of work he puts into electoral politics, which is something that a lot of leftists scoff at and think is unnecessary. And I think that's not only incredibly counterproductive, but I think that's just a terrible, terrible way of looking at it. Just like throwing away elections by saying, hey, all manner of politics is only going to benefit the interests of the upper crust, and it doesn't matter. It's better to just sit it out and wait for a revolution to come is just so silly.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you at all, of course. Yeah.
Anyway, what do you want to talk about, Destiny? I feel like we're filibustering here a little bit. I'm filibustering a little bit.
Yeah, people are definitely going to be pissed at me and Haas because you've said next to nothing, Destiny.
I'm just listening. I'm just hanging out, man.
Here's the thing. They know that he's playing Anno 1880 right now.
I'm listening to you guys talk. I'm not even focusing on the game. It's
his
just
fan base
random.
already knows that, but it doesn't matter. They become such irrational babies sometimes that they're still going to shit on both of us. Mostly me, though. Don't worry.
Let's talk about something where we might disagree. We might have some disagreements. We could either do, what do you want, political violence or trade?
Yeah, I don't care either one. People say that we disagree a lot on protectionism and then like deplatforming people or protectionism or whatever.
All right.
Or I'm sorry, deplatforming people are like
nobody talks about like trade. I feel like deplatforming and free speech is a topic all the time, everywhere. So let's do something a little different. Let's do protectionism.
Okay, sure.
I'm actually, Haas, I'm curious what you think about this. I'm curious whose side you're going to be more on, mine or Destiny.
I don't know, guys. I'm going to be on the side of the truth, okay? So here's my issue with protectionism.
Damn.
Yeah, I'm just kidding. Here's my issue with protectionism, or like a trade in general. I'm the first to admit that I think like global capitalism is very difficult to unpack, and there are certain advantages to even like something like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but then significant disadvantages that made me come out against the TPP. So I don't have like a clear-cut and well-versed opinion on this. I'll be the first to admit that. But I'm willing to hear you guys out.
Destiny, would you say that you're just like pro free trade full stop, or how would you describe
I'm a huge globalist. Basically, my understanding is that things are going to progress in a direction whether or not you want them to. So multilateral trade agreements, basically markets are going to be open all over the world. Basically what you can control is how much influence do you want to exert over these things and how much do you want to participate in them. You don't have a choice to shut them down, and you have to acknowledge the realities of these markets.
Okay, so my position is a little bit different than that. I would say that I believe in trade as a matter of necessity. So there's going to be plenty of things that we need in this country that we don't have here, produce here for whatever reason, and that it's just a fact of reality that requires trade, that requires getting along with other countries, that requires having some sort of agreements. I think all that stuff is unavoidable. But I think the reason why people would generally categorize me as protectionist and why I seem like I'm super protectionist when I talk about this is because it's just a stone cold fact of reality that the trade deals that we have in place right now are specifically crafted of, by, and for the owner class and the corporatists. And they do not care at all about these deals, and they craft them to not care about labor and to screw particularly U.S. labor. And they would rather have, some sweatshop factory in China or India or Sri Lanka or something. They'd rather have that because they make more profit that way than having decent paying jobs in this country. And that's like, those are all decisions that are made, and they're made mostly because of political corruption. You've had these corporations pay politicians for their campaigns for so long, and then when the politicians get elected, they look to do favors for the people that gave them their campaign money. And when, the head of GM or whatever corporation, you fill in the blank, comes to you and says, hey, listen, we want to, outsource the creation of the Chevy Blazer to Mexico because we're going to save a couple shiny pennies on that. Do you care? Can we shut down, the Lordstown plant? Basically, the government has said, because they're so bought and owned, we don't fucking care. Go right ahead. Sure, we're supposed to represent the people of Lordstown, the working people who've been living on whatever, $20 an hour with healthcare and have raised a family or whatever. But we don't care. Uproot their lives, destroy an entire region of the country, and outsource all the jobs. And then we'll turn around when the shit hits the fan, and we'll make some sort of naturalistic argument like, oh, this is just the modern economy and we can't stop it. And no, you had a choice and you made the wrong choice, and you made the wrong choice because of corruption. And that's why it's so easy for a demagogue like Trump to step up, who's a fake populist, who doesn't mean a goddamn word of it, but he goes to the Rust Belt, a place where Hillary wouldn't step foot, and he goes on and on about how the TPP was terrible and the NAFTA was terrible, and I'm going to make sure your jobs stay here and all that stuff. Now, every word of it was a lie, but there's a reason why he was able to win every single, Rust Belt state. And I think that what the Democrats need to do is embrace a sort of robust pro-union, pro-work strategy and political platform, and that will help them.
Okay, there was a lot there. So going to the first part, I understand what you're saying in terms of the fact that a lot of like free trade movements in a way kind of get co-opted by large corporations. Like obviously they're the ones that are going to be in charge of influencing the politicians that write this legislation. But tossing out the idea of free trade because it's corrupted makes about as much sense as tossing out the idea of like having democratic elections because of Citizens United, right? Like I agree that.
Let me just be clear. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't toss it out.
So, like, I'm very much in favor of free trade. Obviously, I mean, I don't think any of the three of us here are in favor of corporations writing legislation to benefit them over the average worker for, like, multilateral trade agreements. I don't think anybody here would be of that mind. So, I mean, like, obviously, the best of both worlds would be a way to write up these deals such that like the average American is represented as much as possible, but still being open to free trade. I don't see why that can't be a possibility.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly like that better than what we have now. And I don't know, theoretically, I'm not sure we could even come up with anything that would be better than that. Like, I wouldn't be against that. I'll say that. But in terms of like the way it works right now, it's almost comical, which is why you have such a populist anti-trade backlash. So
yeah, but I mean, like that could happen just as easily domestically as well, right? Like, so for instance, our ISPs are domestic bodies that collect a lot of our taxpayer money, do fuck all with it, and then fuck the consumers. That has nothing to do with free trade or global stuff. That's all kept domestically. I could just as easily imagine the exact same type of thing happening here, where maybe you get a domestic corporation like Walmart that's able to do all of its manufacturing and everything in the United States. And then, you know, because there are so many artificial restrictions to trade in that world, let's say, for instance, Walmart sells clothes, but I think I can get people that can like do clothes better, but I need to import the material in order to do it. But Walmart does it locally, pays everybody shit, fucks everybody over. But because they're the ones that are engaging in the rent-seeking behavior of keeping trade like artificially locked in the country, now people can't compete with them, and now they fuck everybody over, and they use their position as like a big lobbyist in order to do that, right? Like I feel like we could just as easily envision as many ways that large companies could fuck us domestically in an anti-free trade way as we could, you know, fucking us like internationally with free trade. That's what I feel like.
No, I totally agree with that. But the way we stop that is basically to end the private financing of elections and make it so that we have clean elections by law. Because then you wouldn't have as much sway. These corporations wouldn't have as much sway over the body politic as they do now. And another
for sure, I agree with that.
I think we both agree on the same points, though, that like currently protectionism, regardless of our position on protectionism, we understand that the system is inherently broken because it benefits the owners of corporations rather than the workers. But
I don't agree with that. But
I mean, you don't agree with that? You don't agree that like
I don't agree that capitalism is inherently broken, right? Otherwise, I'd be a socialist or whatever.
Okay.
You are.
Well, capitalism, the way that it creates.
I think Haas is saying the way the system currently works is broken, right?
Yeah.
Haas or no?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But I also don't think that. But I think that is a consequence of capitalism, like the class antagonism that's at the heart of it. And that's precisely why we were talking about like political agency and autonomy for the working class, and helping them engage in political action in a collective manner. But the thing that bothers me is like, I mean, look, I like globalism too, which is why I always have this issue. Like, I think we can have a more morally consistent, a better way of actually participating in global trade. But currently, the same forces that depress wages at the domestic level could be expanded upon global trade in a nearly identical fashion. Exploitation is still at the heart of all of the deals that we're executing, which then ultimately hurts the domestic labor force as well. You guys see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I think that's the core of why, you know, I appear to be super protectionist when I have these conversations in the context of the U.S. is because that's at the heart of it. Like, it's exploitation is the heart of all these deals. That's why they're literally written in secret with like corporate overlords. In some instances, they don't even allow Congress to see it until it's like already done, which is crazy when you think about it. I mean, when you look at TPP, for example, under TPP, you were able to sue for loss of expected profits in the future.
So hold on. I know a lot of people get really mad over stuff like this, but a lot of the provisions in the TPP, so specifically, a lot of people say governments are allowed to be sued by corporations. People will complain about this, but on another hand, this was supposed to be one of the tools that we would give our companies to fight back against people like China. So for instance, I believe one of the provisions of the TPP was you could sue any company or any other, like any company's country that does business in a certain country. So if China put like a shitty company in Germany that was stealing your IP, you could sue China as a result of like a provision in the TPP. That a lot of those tools that seem like really fucked up, like people imagine like, oh, well, people are going to sue the government in order to pollute. I mean, I guess maybe that could be a thing, but in another breath, like it could also be used to fight things like the IP protection that China fucks with so much that we have so many problems with. It just gives us like another tool to fight stuff like that. Kind of like on the WTO.
Historically, every single lawsuit, every single famous lawsuit that has happened in international like corporate tribunals have always favored corporations and denied agency to like actual entire nations. Like it's awful. And
so
and
wait,
what do you?
Countries like China have a lot more power to fight back against it, but countries like Egypt do not. And even countries like France have had struggled with this, if I'm not mistaken. Like Australia had a famous case. Egypt had another famous case with, I think, pharmaceuticals. Australia's case was around cigarettes and like adding safety hazard patches onto cigarettes. Like there are numerous things where like the people could literally democratically elect to do something, and then corporations still have the power to go to a tribunal.
Yes, Haas. Let me explain this.
Have their demands be met.
Okay, I'm sure, Destiny, when you hear this, you're gonna change your opinion a little bit on this. So, under the TPP, there are these allegedly independent international tribunals
or whatever,
that are going to be set up. And under this system, what you do is you take sovereignty away from the countries and you put governments and corporations on equal footing. And so when there is some sort of a dispute like you were just describing, it will be ameliorated and adjudicated at these international tribunals. Now, the problem is, guess who gets to pick the international tribunal? The corporations. So, in other words, it's like arbitration. You know how for arbitration cases, there's some sort of sexual assault in my company. Okay, well, instead of going to the justice system to figure this out, how about you go through this like sham fake trial I set up where I tell you it's no big deal, get over it. It's like that on an international scale with, workers' rights issues and pollution issues, which are definitely going to be the heart of it. I understand what you're saying about how China steals intellectual property, and that's a huge problem. I agree with you that that's a huge problem. But the way that these trade deals are crafted is more about hey, let corporations pollute nonstop. Hey, let's drive wages down more, have a race to the bottom and raise profits at the same time. So it's just that there's no transparency, and the neoliberal world order has made it so that, people's lives are worse off, and we're just going further down that track with the way that these deals are crafted.
Fun fact that arbitration,
So wait. So
94% of the time, the outcome of those sorts of arbitrations go to the corporation itself. Not shocking, but
wait. What's your okay? So somebody literally linked me this on June 24th, 2015. The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development (UNCTAD) released its World Investment Report 2015. Chapter 3 of the report provides some new and most interesting numbers on investor-state dispute settlement cases. Who wins how many cases and when? Following the UNCTAD's traditional methodology, the total number of concluded cases is broken down between settled state wins and investor wins. Arbitral decisions on jurisdictions and merits are thus cumulated without distinction. This application of this methodology results in the following numbers, also presented in the latest WIR. So investors win 27% of the time, states win 36% of the time, it's settled 26% of the time, and then it's discontinued 9% of the time.
But
I also have an
TPP is not implemented, so what's that for?
Well, no, this isn't for TPP. This is because it's said historically, like investors always win, and that the states get fucked on this. So I'm curious if that's actually true. I would have to see that.
Cases that have occurred in the past, the ones that have
the way it's crafted under TPP, the corporations get to pick the international tribunal. So there's literally a conflict of interest problem in that respect. Are you citing numbers from the WTO?
So this is from the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. I don't know if this only includes disputes settled by the WTO or if there are other international tribunals as well. That it's I'm just reading through this right now. But now my understanding was that like most of these like multilateral like trade bodies like generally favor the people that bring suits. Like I think in the WTO, I would have to look up the numbers for this again, but I'm pretty sure in the WTO over half of the time the person that brings suit is the one that wins the case as well. It wasn't just people being favored that were like part of large corporations or whatever.
No. Okay, no. You're making a good point because basically the point is, hey, the way the system works right now, although it's very flawed and has many problems, if we take the next step and implement something like TPP. That's when you get the giant bias because of how the tribunals are crafted. But what you're saying is under the current system, the way it works right now, according to the UN, it's a smaller percentage of the cases get determined on the side of the corporation versus the people, correct?
Wait, I'm sorry. Could you repeat that last thing again?
That the way the system is crafted right now, at least according to the UN, you're saying a smaller percentage of the cases go on the side of the corporation versus the government.
Maybe, I'm not sure. This is literally something that was just linked to me. I'd have to go through and read.
27%, you said.
Yeah, that's according to this right here. But I don't know if this is keeping. So I don't know if this is measuring like everything from the WTO or what exactly. This is just something I'm reading. If you have like a different source on this, I'd be curious to read it. I'm not 100% sure.
Well, Haas, where did you get your number from? What number did you even say?
I said 94, but that's actually arbitration inside of corporations.
I
said that historically the big cases, the most famous cases, have oftentimes favored corporate. Well, even if it doesn't favor corporations, it has the capacity to restrict the autonomy and take away agency from a democratically elected president or a democratically elected government, and this has happened in like numerous cases that I was mentioning. But there's still a lot of there's still 27% that is, from what I understand, settled out of court. But ultimately, you have to look at what these things are, like what the issues are, because just because it in some instances favors the side of the state doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that there isn't an imbalance of power there, especially considering the people that you put in that position, especially under TPP, would be just corporate cardboard cutouts, basically.
So
I mean, or sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I don't want to do too hard of a pivot here, but I just pulled up these numbers and I wanted to share them.
Yeah,
so I think this is from the Economic Policy Institute. Bernie Sanders wrote an op-ed in 2015, and he laid out some of the stuff that they had spoken about. Since 2001, nearly 60,000 manufacturing plants in this country have been shut down, and we've lost over 4.7 million decent-paying manufacturing jobs. NAFTA has led to the loss of nearly 700,000 jobs. Permanent normal trade relations with China has led to the loss of 2.7 million jobs. Our trade agreement with South Korea has led to the loss of about 75,000 jobs. While bad trade agreements are not the only reason why manufacturing jobs in the U.S. have declined, they're an important factor. So
I don't know if those are necessarily bad things, though.
So I was going to say that's like the heart of why I'm so hard on our trade agreements is that if you're a representative or you're a senator, you're a congressman in the U.S., your job is to represent your constituents. And what these people do is they don't give a fuck about them. They don't care about them.
Yeah, but I don't care. Yeah, I don't give a fuck about them, though. This is part of my economic position. I don't care about manufacturing jobs in the United States. If another country can do it for cheaper and we have the ability to allocate our workforce to do other things, this is comparative advantage 101. Why would I want to try to compete with another country on manufacturing when they could do it a million times cheaper? It gives people here the ability to do better jobs that pay more, hopefully. It gives people the ability to buy other things for cheaper prices. It gives you the ability to open up other types of jobs because people have more money to spend on things like this, right? If you've got to spend, $20 or $30 on a cheap t-shirt because we're going to manufacture everything made in America, I don't know. I just don't see that as being a win, that we have to punish every single American citizen to save our manufacturing jobs.
No, but okay, so it's not as drastic as the hypothetical you gave, because I remember reading a story on this years ago. I'll see if I can pull up the exact number, but it's only 15 or 20 cents more to get something. I think the example they were giving was for fast food, a burger would be 15 or 20 cents more to pay them a living wage as they did it. So it's the same, it's the same thing at work here. It's okay, you could pay a factory worker in the US a living wage, or you can outsource it to wherever, fill in the blank, Burundi, I don't know, and you pay them whatever, $1 an hour. But it's not you don't have to pay that much more. And we also avoid that race to the bottom. But basically, the perspective that you just gave, that's the exact argument that's made from the business owner. They're like, hey, listen, I own the company. I get to make the decisions. I'm going to, we'll make a little bit more money if we do this. I don't care about the people who live in fucking Bumblefuck, Ohio. Fuck them. But now to get to Hasan's main thesis here, and his whole point is that, well, then maybe something's inherently fucked up with the way our system functions, and maybe it shouldn't be this little fucking dictator, business owner, philosopher king who gets to determine things and uproot people's lives willy-nilly and not give a fuck about it. That's a huge problem. And a good solution to this would be you should have at least 50% of a board for a given company should be labor, because there's no way that they would decide collectively to outsource the jobs and ruin their own fucking communities.
Yeah, but we always look at it from one side where we hyper obsess, or lefties hyper obsess over like the merits of letting labor decide what they want to do. Well, labor is just going to vote in their own interest, and they're going to fuck other people as a result, like just as easily. Like, do I want, let's say for instance, I have the ability to buy a t-shirt for $10, and there's like a t-shirt manufacturing firm down the street that's like worker run and the workers are voting shit. Well, let's say that there's the opportunity that we could outsource all of their jobs and I could buy that shirt for $2 or something. They're never going to vote on that. So here I am having to spend more of my money in a regressive manner, right? Because chances are, if you're poor, you're spending a higher percentage of your income on like clothes and shit. Well, now this impacts even the lowest of people have to spend more money to save their shitty jobs because they don't want to export any of their jobs to another country because they're only looking out for themselves. Why does everybody have to suffer to save their jobs?
Because
their wages are higher, Destiny. That's what you're missing. You're saying, oh my God.
Their wages, but only a small subset of the economy's wages are. Not everybody works at these plants who are going to be saving money.
Well, but you have to think about it from the perspective of, you said it's a narrow perspective to only think about the labor.
Yeah, like look at like manufacturing cars in America. Every single person in America, or almost every person in America, is impacted by the cost of vehicles, right? Why the fuck would I save a couple cities worth of jobs?
The majority of people are the workers, so why should we care about the fucking asshole owner who's making these decisions? There's so many fewer owners than there are laborers. Why? It's like saying, why?
Well, I don't care about the owner, or I'm not looking at the owner. I'm not looking at the owner or the laborer. I'm looking at the consumer, right? What gets them the cheapest product so that they can allocate their money in the way that.
Right now, there's a race to the bottoms. Okay, I can go to Walmart and get really fucking cheap goods, but also my salary per year is 20 grand. If we retool the economy and make it so that you have workers on the boards, we wouldn't have wages that are so low. So people would have more money. And yeah, the goods might be 15 or 20 cents more if you go to Walmart forever, but you also have a hell of a lot more money in the bank. And this isn't like, we're not even talking like fucking theory here. There are countries that exist in the world right now that care a lot more about workers and have, like in Germany, for example, they have 50% of the board in all the corporations is labor. And guess what? They're, the sky hasn't fallen and goods aren't unattainable. If anything, they have a higher quality of life than we do.
Well, but Germany also is like within inside one of the largest, or I'm sorry, the largest market like in the whole world, right? Germany exists in the heart of the EU, so they can export and import from all sorts of people within their own trading block.
No, Destiny, you're incorrect. The reason why Germany is so successful is because it's the industrial engine that fuels the entirety of the EU. And guess why? Because they didn't actually outsource their factories over to China. They have massive factories in that country and a robust labor force. That is precisely why the German economy is so powerful.
So what happens to Germany if every other country decides to take the same protectionist approach and says, well, we're not going to import stuff manufactured in Germany, fuck you? Then Germany falls apart and goes to shit immediately.
No, this is why I said that
wait, what do you mean no?
Manner. No, I'm saying this is why I said it's a complicated manner. Obviously.
Wait, it's not complicated. You just said, no, hold on, wait, just this one thing. You just said that the only reason Germany is able to do what it's doing is because they export manufacturing around the world. What if every other country took your approach and said, well, fuck you, we're not going to import what you manufacture in Germany? What happens to Germany at that point?
That's why I never said that I'm fully what do you think protectionism is? It's not about like completely shutting off any sort of completely shutting off opportunities from outside.
Yes, it is. To some extent, it is. Protectionism is the idea that you want to foster growth in certain industries, so you stop importing.
And I don't think anyone would be on board with that.
Okay, but it's not fair for you. It's
like saying, hey, if you like cheap labor, then why not slave labor? Why not?
No, it's not fair. It's not fair for you to say, well, look, Germany's really successful because of their manufacturing when Germany is thriving on the free trade of other countries. Of course, they can do well.
You are setting up a little bit of like a caricature of the protectionist position. Like, we all understand that it is incredibly complicated and that these are not, you don't just take to steal a phrase from Obama, you don't use a fucking hatchet when you need a scalpel. Like, we all get that it's really complicated, but the idea that you don't even consider letting the workers have a bigger say on the board, or you don't consider in certain instances doing protectionist policies. I mean, this is all it's all very rational stuff that has existed at certain
I don't agree.
History.
In certain instances, I do think protectionist policy can be okay. If you want to protect certain fledgling industries, especially for developing countries, I think that there are certain instances where protectionist policy, okay, this is to be decided by economists, not a dumb fuck board of laborers that don't know anything about international trade. I would never trust a person whose job is on the line to vote for a sensible policy related to their job. Absolutely not.
They're there to protect their own interests, Destiny.
Right? They don't. Oftentimes you have some of the biggest fucking assholes. They still say Art Laffer isn't a fucking economist. He's been wrong about every single fucking thing he's ever said. They still say Larry Kudlow is an economist or is an expert about the economy. The dude's been wrong about everything he's ever said. So there is no democratic interests are just as important as having people who can crunch the numbers and be experts on this stuff. Because
100%.
for the economy, it's not like math where the answer is the answer and that's the end of the fucking conversation. There actually are competing theories, and there are just think about it of Keynesianism, for example. They don't say like at all times, doing quantitative easing is a good thing, but sometimes quantitative easing is a good thing. So it is a complicated thing, and you do need to kind of weigh the different interest groups, whether it's labor, whether it's economists, and what they're telling you is the right thing to do at the time. I mean, it's not an easy answer.
I mean, like, I would love to revisit this like at a later time because I don't have like all my sources on hand, but like I had a debate where I had to debate some guy against Trump's protectionist policies, and I did a fuck ton of reading this. I couldn't find a single fucking economist. What?
Yeah, because his
no, not just related to Trump, but when I tried to do reading about protectionism, I couldn't find any economist worth his weight in salt that would actually come and be like, oh yeah, protectionist policies are generally good. Every time it's been practiced in the United States, it's been done for stupid political reasons. It's generally always resulted in net losses. It seems like most economists believe that most of our like multilateral trade agreements, including things like NAFTA, have generally benefited America in general. Now, some industries have been like hurt. So for instance, agriculture in places like California or manufacturing in places like Detroit maybe suffer, but as a whole, like America tends to benefit. That seems to be the position, but I don't like have these sources like on hand. But this idea that like anybody supports like protectionist policies as a means to build or help an economy, or that like multilateral trade agreements are bad, I don't know. I would have to go back and like we can like dig through sources and shit on this.
Mm-hmm. Here's the problem with what you just laid out right there.
Yeah,
it's like the people who, and it's always conservatives that they'll always bring up like the GDP or how the fucking stock market is doing, as if it's like a good indicator of how your average American is doing. And you see a lot of the same shit happening with, certain economists when they talk about trade, where they act like, bro, I don't see the problem. Look, the profits are soaring, so everybody's by definition doing well. It's like, well, yeah, your spectrum of analysis is so narrow that it's doing well in the confines of the spectrum you just laid out, but that's not an accurate spectrum. It's like, the point that Haas kind of alluded to before, where people always are like, oh, bro, you can't have a minimum wage, because if you have a minimum wage, it will by definition lead to unemployment. So you can't have it. And obviously employment, this is like a key economic indicator that we need to care about. It's super important. Well, then you can easily respond to that by saying, okay, there's a way we can have literally full employment 100% across the board. You know how? Slavery. Does that mean we should do slavery? No. Like, it's a shitty, narrow way of analyzing how the economy.
I don't disagree with you, but like on one end, having a bigger pie is better. You just have to figure out how to divvy it up, right? So like, I don't disagree, for instance, that companies that take advantage of immigrant labor or companies that take advantage of exporting their supply chain to other countries to make higher profits probably aren't helping us if they're not distributing those earnings to either their American workers or to other people in the United States. So I'm in favor, I think like you are, of like greater like redistributive tax policies and stuff like that. If you take advantage of exporting your supply chain to other countries, if other people manufacture for you, maybe you should have to pay a higher tax in America that takes care of people that don't have these types of jobs or that are suffering as a result of this. I'm okay with things like that. What I'm not okay with is saying, well, because corporations benefit from this economically beneficial thing, we're going to shoot ourselves in the foot and say, fuck our economy. We're going to throw away all the stuff that we know is good just because it only benefits a narrow subsection of Americans, rather than saying, well, let's take this thing that benefits a narrow subsection of Americans, let's tax them for it, and then we can redistribute the winnings to everybody so that we can continue to take good economic practices like into our decision-making thing, and then use our tax policy to reward or punish people accordingly. I feel like that's like the better approach to things.
If we didn't do NAFTA, if we didn't do permanent normal with China, if we didn't do CAFTA, do you think we'd be in a worse position today or a better position today?
I think we'd absolutely be in a worse position, no question asked.
I totally disagree with that. I think we'd be in a much better position. Yeah.
Okay. I feel like every
Why do you
analysis
think we'd be in a worse position? Because like consumer goods would be a little bit more expensive, or what do you?
You say a little bit more. Everybody acts like, oh, well, an iPhone would just cost like $1. Maybe the iPhone won't even exist. I mean,
let me inject a fact here quick, because I actually was able to successfully find the thing that I was trying to reference earlier. According to researchers Ken Jacobs, David Graham-Squire, and Stephanie Lucci, 41.4% of a pay increase to $12 an hour would go to workers in, okay, sorry, let me cut to the chase, the number here. 46 cents is how much more a family would pay at Walmart if Walmart decided to pay a living wage. 46 cents more for your average purchase. So in other words,
wait, this is minimum wage policy. This has nothing to do with international trade or protectionism.
But I referenced this before. It was an ancillary point that was talking to the same principle. So I just wanted to give you the exact number. Bottom line is, yes, you can have regulation on the economy, and it's not like all of a sudden if you do the regulation that it's going to be worse off for everybody. In fact, basically my point is, for tiny trade-offs, you have massive benefit. So if you craft these trade deals in a way that are fair to workers, you can still have the upsides of not shooting yourself in the foot, to use your language, without destroying the economy. So you can help workers and also not be in a little isolationist bubble where you can't get certain goods because you're totally anti-trade. It's a little bit of a false dichotomy to act like, oh, if we're a little bit more protectionist and we care about workers, that somehow that'll tank our standing in the world economy or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. 100%.
But no economist will back this position up.
I know, but
we can dig into. I really want to revisit with state. Well, hold on. Because you're basically laying out a really pretty story to me that has never been borne out ever. All these countries that have tried, with very rare examples, maybe Japan post World War II. It's usually very rare that a country enacts hyper protectionist policies and it ends up benefiting the country. It seems generally that when you open trade, even for every analysis I've seen on NAFTA, for every American job lost, you gain so much in terms of productivity or decreased prices of consumer goods, that all of these things seem to be borne out pretty well. And to say I don't know. So what exactly is your argument that somehow we could protect manufacturing jobs by
everyone? Everyone suffers from learning from the same school of thought. Everyone is a neoclassical economist, and therefore they all have similar understandings in regards to the importance of GDP rather than the conditions of the working class. So
yeah,
that's precisely why you don't hear a lot of Marxian economist takes either. Sorry, go ahead, Kyle.
No, well, I was going to say my argument is that those numbers that I was citing are numbers that I think are super important in the conversation in terms of how many people's lives. I mean, I'm curious.
Can you we don't have to go over this now because I'll go over this later. Can you shoot me whatever you have later? You don't have to do this now, but whatever you see where it's if we just spent 20 cents more, every worker would have a living wage order. I'd be really curious in seeing stuff like that.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll send it to you. Of course.
And to further drive home that point that I was making before. The same argument centered around increasing taxes in the past. The same argument centered around increasing the minimum wage, or at least adjusting it back to inflation. And economists also, just like you said before, Stephen, all had the same arguments, and they all were essentially in agreement that raising the minimum wage was going to hurt the working class. And look what happened in places like Seattle, in other places where they have implemented these minimum wage requirements.
I don't think that's true, though. I think that economists are usually pretty mixed on things like minimum wage.
No, now you're gonna pull out data. No. What I'm talking about. No. Don't turn around and tell me that the minimum wage argument wasn't consistent, or that economists absolutely did not have the same perspective in regards to what was happening in Seattle or anywhere that minimum wage has been implemented in the past. Economists don't have mixed feelings over this. They have mixed feelings after the fact.
No, Destiny's right that there are mixed feelings, but the mixed feelings are that there's Austrian economists who've been wrong about everything else who chime in now and say, if you raise the minimum wage in any capacity, even if you just have a minimum wage, it will by definition lead to unemployment, which is of course bad, which means we can't have a minimum wage, and we certainly can't raise it if we. That's the general argument. But there's actually plenty of economic literature which says as long as you raise the minimum wage in a way that's reasonable. So in other words, you can't jack it up from $7.25 to $15 overnight, because that actually would lead to job loss. But if you do it over time and you do it carefully, then yes, you can do it, and it will have minimal effect on job loss. And in some instances, there was even a gain in employment. But the final thing I wanted to say on this particular topic is that I'm very curious, and I actually do not know what he would say, but there's a left-wing economist who I deeply respect. His name's Professor Richard Wolff. And I'm very curious his thoughts on trade, because he surprised me he doesn't have down the line views where you could just predict everything he's going to say, and he has really solid arguments for everything he talks about. So I'm very curious what his thoughts are on this. I would be surprised if he said that NAFTA and CAFTA and the World Trade Organization have been a net benefit for the economy as a whole, even just putting aside workers. I think he would probably make the argument that it's been bad as a whole. But that being said, I'll bite my tongue now because I don't know what he would say.
Sure, yeah. I mean, we could revisit things like globalization and come back, I guess, on trade. But like, yeah, I feel like every time I've done this research in the past, it's always like reaffirmed my position like a million times over. It seems like I've never found like this huge body of work or all these economists that are like, oh yeah, like we need to hardcore protect our industries. Like it'll definitely benefit the average American worker. It just never seems to be the case. It seems like if you want to make these trade-offs, what you're doing at the end of the day is you're saying we are going to arbitrarily value certain American jobs. So we'll say manufacturing, and we're going to do that at the cost and detriment to every other American worker and business. Everyone else is going to suffer as a result of this, but at least we can save this narrow subset of manufacturing jobs. Every company that relies on transportation, every individual that buys a car, all of these other people are going to be paying more for it, and any business that would have benefited by people having more disposable income are going to suffer for it. But at the very least, we can save this like a few 100,000 manufacturing jobs.
Okay,
that seems to be the case every single thing I look at.
No, it's a misrepresentation of that position.
We didn't do NAFTA and we didn't do permanent normal trade relations with China. That if we didn't do that, that somehow like we'd be living in a hellscape right now. I don't
think we'd be living in a hellscape. I just think we'd be worse off. I mean, like in your world, like maybe things work off. I mean, I don't think, like for instance, like in the world where we don't normalize trade relations with China or do NAFTA, like I don't think like the country collapses or whatever. We all die. We'd probably be fine. We'd just be a little bit shittier.
Okay, and there's another element that we're not considering, though. There's another element that we're not considering in the form of like ensuring that we still have a strong labor force in America. Not only helps the American economy because now those consumers have more purchasing power, but also on top of that, you build a momentum from the bottom up. Like that's part of the reason why I originally started this conversation before we even talked about trade deals by talking about the completely eviscerated labor class, the working class Americans here. Like the benefits of that, especially in regards to legislation that would favor them, is significant. It would genuinely improve the lives of all Americans. Like I happen to think that if we still had manufacturing jobs here in this country, we probably, and we still continue to have trade unions, we probably would already have achieved like some form of Medicare for all or maybe even nationalized healthcare in its entirety.
Destiny, just for the record, I DM'd you the thing that I had mentioned about minimum wage.
Okay.
And the increase of 46 cents or whatever.
Sure.
But
I don't like the idea that we need to keep our economy the way that it's always been. Like we can't like move our economy forward because we have to protect some other workers. Like I'd rather like continue to innovate in our economy and move forward. Go ahead.
Just to be clear, I don't believe that. I don't think we have to keep the economy exactly as it is. And I don't think I think that your portrayal of a more protectionist trade policy like Bernie Sanders would advocate for and many lefties would advocate for, I think it's a little bit of a caricatured view of it. I think that, yeah, but we don't have to keep talking about this. We can get to other stuff. Should we?
This is like my last topic, so because I have to leave in like 5 minutes ago.
Wait, Kyle, do you want to stay on after this? I want to bring in Trihex again and continue the conversation, or do you have to run?
No, I'm good for another like 30 minutes, 40 minutes. You can bring him in.
Oh, okay, perfect. All right. Destiny, are you going to leave now, or how much longer do you have? I didn't hear you, sorry.
I can probably hang out for like 5 more minutes.
Okay, cool. All right.
All right, so do you want to disagree or agree in that 5 minutes?
Let's
keep disagreeing.
I
like
all right, so let's do political violence. I think actually all three of us might have different views on this. Like that one was kind of me and Haas versus you, Destiny, but I think all three of us disagree on this one. So political violence, what's your stance, Haas? We'll start with you.
Okay, there's different forms of violence, as I tried to mention last time we had this conversation. For example, structural violence, like poverty, the violence that causes you to go out and do jobs that you don't want to do because of the fear that if you don't take on these jobs that you won't be able to actually put food on your table and put a shelter over your head and protect your family. So, and then there's systemic violence that we also usually normalize, like state violence or police violence, these sorts of things that most people don't have, like most average apolitical people don't have issue with. And then there is, I guess, what we would consider political violence, the third form, which oftentimes is outside of the norm or is considered as outside of the norm, like violence to capital or like anti-fascist mobilization. And I happen to think that while I don't advocate for it, I won't stand in the way of it, especially when it comes to the, especially if it's used as a last-ditch effort. And I think one of the successes of this could be seen in the Gilets Jaunes movement in France, where they're literally fucking burning the entire city every weekend, and have been able to successfully get the government to at least listen to them. And historically speaking, political violence of that sort is not only morally justifiable, as I'm sure Steve will mention, but also has been rather successful. And it is actually May Day right now. A consequence of political violence is the 40-hour work week and no more child labor and having weekends off. That is directly a consequence of political violence.
Okay, what do you think, Destiny? What's your take on political violence?
I think that so the distinction that I draw is that I think a lot of it can be morally justified, but I think right now where we exist in like the US, I don't think it's effective right now. Well, or rather forms can be, but I wouldn't say, for instance, like we should go out and kill all conservatives, but I think that things like violent riots and whatnot could probably bring attention to certain issues that people feel like are like horribly impacting their lives. So for instance, things like the elimination of healthcare in the United States, like the ACA, or things like related to DACA recipients, or maybe labor laws or stuff like that.
Okay, so I kind of, first of all, that was an interesting point that you made, Haas, about how there's different kinds of political violence, and how, one is basically like you're now forced to go get a job that you don't want to do, because if you didn't, you're like, whatever, you'll be on the street. Like that is a form of political violence. For purposes of this conversation, though, I'm just going to put aside like all those forms of like that kind of political violence and just focus on a more narrow definition of like, hand on fucking club hitting somebody over the head or shooting somebody, so I agree that I think history shows that certain forms of political violence can be very useful and can work. And riots, for example, they do tend to, there's evidence that they but I think my position on this is I think we can achieve the same things through more nonviolent methods. So if you pick a goal, whatever the goal might be, I don't care. Oh, we got to get Medicare for all, or we got to stop the violent deportation of people who obviously shouldn't be deported. I think that can be achieved through a general strike where you have high levels of participation and you can basically ground the economy to a halt. And as the old saying goes, if the poor won't provide food, the rich will have to eat money. So they have no out, they have nowhere to go. And then they will be forced to take action on whatever the issue may be that we're doing the mass mobilization over. So I think that I actually think that we need to take a pretty strong principled stance against all offensive forms of political violence. Because I think that once you open that door, you've agreed to a principle that will then immediately be used by the right, and the right is actually better when it comes to violence because it's almost inherent in their ideology.
What do you say to people, though, that feel like violence is already being enacted against them? So for instance, like somebody, like say you're on healthcare and now the Republicans are basically saying, hey, by the way, the ACA is going away. And you're like, well, fuck, like I'm literally fucked. Like my life could theoretically be over. And then you're like, well, I'm going to go out and riot. And so I was like, well, hold on, dude, don't be violent. Like, don't you think that it's kind of shitty?
Yes, I'm in favor. The only kind of violence that I support, and this is not just domestically, this is also internationally. I think the only way you could justify it is if it's defensive in nature. So if you have a strong enough case that there is indeed offensive violence being done on you, then you do have a case to be violent in response. Now, I think that the particular example that you give, like there really are different kinds of violence. So it's kind of hard to parse through it all and determine what falls into what category. But for an example like the one you gave, yeah, I think that at that point, I mean, it's hard to not sympathize with some sort of property damage,
Yeah.
Because how can you say that's immoral when there's like an violence being, brought upon you by the state, and it's like, okay, you're gonna die because you can't afford healthcare, and like it is because of the nature of the system, and this is a form of violence preventing you from living when we can fucking take care of you and cure you or whatever. Well, yeah, how can you get mad at somebody for doing some sort of property damage or something?
And this is precisely why all forms of political violence must also feature an analysis over structural violence as well as political violence in the form of like a violent state or a militant state. Because as you mentioned before, it's not just about healthcare, but or it's not just about a direct action against the government, like a general strike. That's a beautiful idea, and it's been implemented in the past in successful ways. But what happens when there are scabs? What happens when you try to stop that from happening? What happens when the government, as it historically has, decides, fuck that, we're going to bring over the police force and break this strike in its entirety? At that point, that's why I said I'm not in favor of it as a first action. It's not a great first measure, and I don't even think even anarchists or anyone here would agree that it's a solid first measure or solid first step. These are multivariate problems that require multivariate solutions, where we have, on the one hand, peaceable options on the table. We have the Martin Luther King Jr. protesting in the streets, doing civil disobedience, and then you also have Malcolm X on the side protecting black communities, oftentimes with armed forces if necessary, while also doing things like the breakfast program.
So I think I'm like a little more sensitive to optics though than you, Haas, because, and maybe even because I actually do think that as a general rule, anytime there's some form of left-wing violence, it will immediately be portrayed as like, they're the violent ones, they're the thugs, they're doing this offensively. And so you have to kind of account for that level of propaganda and misleading in your analysis of when it makes sense to use violence. And
I feel like the counter propaganda to that point, though, is still always going to be the problem. Is like, and even it sounds like, I'm not saying you're doing this intentionally, but it almost sounds like you writing off completely the violence committed by the other side.
Yeah.
So, like, for instance, like so here, I'll give it a personal, because I know we love stories so much, right? I had a friend that worked at McDonald's. He fucking hated his job, but he had worked there for the past 5 years, and he knew he was going to die at that job because he had type 1 diabetes, and there was no way that he could leave that job because he had health insurance through them. There's just no way. He can't ever switch jobs because of that pre-existing condition. Although under the ACA, that changed, right? But because he had type 1 diabetes, he was stuck at that job forever because health insurance is usually tied to your job. So this is a person whose life is being like immeasurably fucked. Like, imagine being like 30 years old and it's like, I have to work at McDonald's and I can't do anything different. Like, your economic opportunity is fucked, your educational opportunity is fucked, maybe your ability to create a family is fucked. All of this is basically, completely destroying your life. Maybe you get a way out of that due to the ACA, and other Republicans are like, nope, we're taking that away. To tell a person like that, well, hold on, dude, like, look at the optics of you like going after them. Isn't that really fucked? Shouldn't the answer to that person be like, or rather, wouldn't that person say, well, your optics are actually fucked. Violence is being enacted against me every single fucking day by the state, and there's literally like no recourse for me. Like, I'm totally fucked.
Well, I wouldn't say to that guy, your optics are fucked. I wouldn't say that to him specifically.
Wasn't that what you're saying to Hasan, though, right now, technically?
Well, I'm just saying that in general, the left should be aware of that, because it's so, I've seen it time and time again, where it's there, left is immediately portrayed as like, look at these violent thugs rioting, and it's totally senseless violence. And I just think we need to be cognizant of that. But I'm not saying that therefore now our principle should change, or our standard on when political violence makes sense changes. And for that guy's situation, first, let me just ask you, what should be done in that situation? What should he do in that situation?
Can I just step in really quickly and bring up a historical point that I think is important?
I love you all very much. I have to leave. I should have left a long time ago. I'm so sorry. Okay, but you guys listen. Carry on. I love you guys very much. Okay, everybody can go to Hasan's channel if you want to watch the continuation of this conversation. Have fun.
Bye, Destiny.
See you, man.
Okay. Hold on. I need to reconfigure everything now. Bonnell left, but the thing I was going to say is,
we'll get Trihex in here, no?
Yeah. I'm gonna bring him in right now. The thing I was going to mention really quickly is that when Martin Luther King, and I think you and I both agree that it was a largely peaceful protest, right? Like he was very much in favor of civil disobedience, and I don't think anyone actually considers it like the movements his movement to be, his movement to be offensive in any way. Looking back at it now, at the time. I believe it was 67% of the country that still thought that they were being violent thugs. And I think it's like an old anarchist saying where the violence only starts when the protesters throw back the tear gas. So it's like, that is, I think, a really great way of understanding the difference between what kind of violence is expected and what kind of violence is completely normalized versus what kind of violence is unexpected and is susceptible to public perception. And that's why I always say, like, look, it might look bad right now, but that's why you got to have a strong ground for, you got to have a level of respect for anti-fascist mobilization, and even movements like the J20 protests that occurred, for example, where the government basically did fucking dragnet during the inauguration and arrested a bunch of journalists and a bunch of other protesters simply because structural damage had occurred. I'm going to fix your camera really quickly, too, while you...
What's that? What do I have to do?
No, you're fine. I'm just fixing your camera and also bringing up Trihex.
Okay, so my response to that would be, I think that the reason today Martin Luther King is viewed as a hero is actually because he was also super principled in his pursuit of justice. And you could go back and find now like countless examples of him talking about how, you know, it is morally superior to be nonviolent and to try to impact change and actually fix society through this path. And he even goes as far, he's almost like literally like Jesus in his philosophy, in a way that I don't go as far as he does. He's almost like a genuine pacifist. Like, oh, if somebody hits you, turn the other cheek. You know, like, so now I don't agree with pacifism. I'm okay with violence for defensive purposes, but it's because he was so principled, and we all know what his stance is on nonviolence, that in due time, now he's viewed as like a giant hero because he was right on the substance of what he was fighting for, and he was super principled in his pursuit. And I feel like we can't be like willy-nilly on the issue of violence, because the only way history judges the left kindly is also if they're super principled and clear that, hey man, we didn't start the fire. We're here to fight back. We're here to try to fix the problem and do it in a way that's pure and in a way that still upholds our morals and our ethics. What's up, Trihex?
Hey, what's up, y'all? Sorry about that. Sorry if I interrupted anything.
No, not at all.
How's it going?
We're
heard there was a leftist Illuminati union going on, and I wasn't invited, so I wanted to pop in real quick.
Did you see the debate on trade or no? Did you get to see it?
No. I was busy playing Smash earlier. I didn't even know if I was gonna be able to join. I saw y'all were like waist deep in some talk there, so I just didn't know if I should be on standby or what. So I ended up just playing some games while waiting for y'all to see what was going on.
Yeah, we debated trade, and it was basically me and Haas versus Destiny there for a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
By the way, I think you did a really good job with that, Kyle. For the record.
Thanks, man. You too. It was actually somewhat unfair because it was like 2 versus 1.
Yeah. No, Destiny's used to that. Well, the difference is he's not used to having a 2v1 with like 2 people who know what the fuck they're talking about. He's normally doing
left.
like
we were arguing with him from the left.
That's the issue.
Would y'all enjoy recapping what it was? Like, it was the argument over open trade versus so domesticated trade for like. He was
basically arguing for a more free trade approach to the economy, and we were arguing for a slightly more protectionist approach. And like, we were taking the stance of NAFTA was bad, permanent normal trade relations with China was bad. It led to destroyed manufacturing towns. And his position was basically, I'm trying my best not to like straw man him here. I'm gonna try and give him the best view of what he was saying. His argument was, even though there were downsides to free trade, the upsides outweigh the downsides. And so since like we get cheaper products, and since it's helped the economy in other ways, therefore free trade is better than having a more protectionist approach. That was basically the argument. And it went on for a solid amount of time. We probably argued, what would you say, Haas, 40 minutes or so on that?
I guess, yeah. But now we're talking about political violence and whether it's acceptable or not, or if it's completely unacceptable on all forms. The thing I was going to say, again, by the way, Kyle, I want to hear your perspective on Malcolm X, for example, or Fred Hampton.
So I actually think Malcolm X gets a little bit of a bad, well, not a little bit of a bad rap. He gets a giant bad rap when actually, if you go back and listen to his speeches, he was really clear all along that he only believed in violence for defensive purposes. So I actually am in total agreement with Malcolm X on that.
Okay, so you're in agreement with me on it too then, because my opinion is never of the mindset that we should be going out and fucking bike locking random MAGA hat wearing dipshits on college campuses or punching them. My opinion is very similar to Malcolm X's on this. And I think a lot of leftist people who a lot of leftist people who argue on behalf of anti-fascism also seem to agree with that perspective, that like this is always defensive.
Well, I don't know, because if you test that principle with them, they'll often like back off of it pretty quickly, because all you have to do is bring up the punching Richard Spencer incident, and they're all like, "Yeah, that was a good idea," and it's like, well, no, that was offensive. Like, he wasn't about to attack anybody.
Yeah. So
there's a lot of offensive.
The Richard Spencer argument again goes back to kind of the similar thing that I mentioned before, but that is completely. This is the reason why anti-fascism is localized and decentralized and has nothing. There's no like main authoritative body. One, because they're fucking anarchists, so obviously that's probably an unjustifiable hierarchy to begin with. But two, this is all about self-protection, and a lot of people who call themselves Marxists or anarchists are under the assumption that the very presence of a Nazi, given the fact that Nazi ideology and fascist ideology ultimately, as we all have seen before, turns into a violent one because it's built upon the principle of exclusion, that having a free reign for someone like Richard Spencer to be normalized in public and giving them a platform and simply treating it as though it's a difference in opinion is a very destructive thing to do. And we've seen the consequences of that, and we've seen the positive results of what happens when you deplatform people like Milo Yiannopoulos in a non-violent way, which I'm also in favor of. And we've seen what happened to Richard Spencer in that similar fashion. Richard Spencer talked about how afraid he was to go out in public. Now, I totally see the counter to this. I totally see the other side of this, where it's like, well, what happens if the barrel of the gun is pointed at you? What happens when people vilify you for your perspectives? Well, the only thing I'll say to that is, people not only vilify me for my perspective, and I'm comfortable with that because I know that this is something that I have to deal with. It's a part of the process, and I wish it wasn't true. But people also enact actual violence upon marginalized communities. And Richard Spencer's entire ideology is built around the justification of that marginalization, or the justification of that violence. When Milo went to college campuses, he outed trans people, outed immigrant dreamers and immigrant students, and he reported them just as a joke, just as a fun little thing. And I would argue that leads to much more devastating and much more violent outcomes that oftentimes are normalized by our administration, because it does not pose any specific threat to the established order. So that's why punching someone like Richard Nazi would be a justifiable action to make.
Yeah, see, this is where we disagree, because I think that in order to get to the point where you're making the argument that punching him in that context is defensive, at that point, I think you're just bullshitting. It's like, it's such a tortured explanation, like, oh, because he believes this thing, and because he's spoken about it publicly, therefore, it's actually defensive to fucking sucker punch him when he's not even looking. It's like, no, that's obviously offensive, and we need to call a spade, and that's what it is. And we can hold this belief, like two beliefs at the same time. Number one is Richard Spencer is a giant piece of shit, and he's wrong about virtually everything, and he's dangerous. And also, you shouldn't punch anybody offensively, especially when like they're not fucking paying attention or anything and not looking. So, and I know this might get me some shit, because I think I voiced this opinion at the time, like, yeah, don't just randomly punch people. And people got mad at me, but you know what? I still think that that's the case. Like, again, when we say violence only makes sense for defensive purposes, I'm quite literal about that. Now, the only gray area, Haas, is actually what you brought up before, and what Destiny was talking about, which is, well, what do you do when there's structural violence, and that structural violence isn't even like kind of ambiguous, and maybe it is, maybe it's not there. This is like legit, no, because of the structure of the system, there's violence being enacted upon you. In that situation, it's like you are totally justified to do violence because it's defensive, but I would say it has to be proportionate also. And I would also say we should probably exhaust every option possible not being violent before you get to the violent option.
Full agree. Full agree. And by the way, for the record, sorry, Trihex, not to cut you off, but for the record, that's precisely why I mentioned anti-fascism. The anti-fascist ideology, and there's a long and robust history behind this as well, leading all the way back to the 1930s and more modern movements. But the anti-fascist ideology revolves around destabilizing and cutting off the momentum against fascist ideology. Anti-fascists would not exist if fascists did not exist. That's why that's why you didn't really hear about Antifa or anti-fascism before Trump came into a position of power, even though they were, they would exist in places like Europe where there were neo-Nazi movements and other fascist movements. And the other thing I'm going to mention is they do exhaust all the other options. Richard Spencer being punched in the face or Richard Spencer being threatened in a physical fashion was a last measure, a last-ditch effort. It was after all other opportunities were exhausted, and yet Richard Spencer was still getting a dramatic amount of media coverage. Now, I'm not saying people should go out and punch Nazis in the face randomly or, go out, do it as a first measure. Now, some people might want to do that. I'm not going to sit here and cry over it for too long. I'm not saying that you are, by the way. I'm just like, that's my specific take on it. But this only comes about after we're like, hey, first you shine a light on it and you show people that this person is a Nazi, and then you explain to people why being a Nazi is bad, because some people literally need to fucking hear that, unfortunately. And then you do everything you can to ensure that this person's voice is not amplified in the marketplace of ideas, because they're not operating on similar terms. They're not operating in good faith. They're operating on misinformation. They're bad faith actors. And you achieve the deplatforming measures from a multitude of different ways. You call places that are hosting Richard Spencer and urge them not to do this. You protest. You try to disrupt the speeches that are happening. These are all nonviolent methods that make someone uncomfortable, but they're still nonviolent methods. And finally, the last measure effort there is that because this idea, again, is based upon exclusion and based upon violence, and there is historic examples of this ideology turning very violent very quickly, people in a last-ditch defensive effort try to put fear in the heart of someone like Richard Spencer.
Yeah, but I think we disagree here though, because that's I feel like that's just putting lipstick on a pig by defining what they did as defensive. I just don't agree that it's defensive. And I think that I know the arguments for, trying to deplatform somebody like Spencer, but I honestly don't think, even if there was no attempt to deplatform those kinds of people, I don't think that like one day we wake up and they'd have 50+1% support in the country. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have other complete and utter bigoted demagogues rise to power, as we've seen with Trump. And, many Republicans are pretty much fly that flag and are proud of that. But I think it's a little bit hyperbolic when the argument is made that like, oh my God, if we don't take this drastic action of like sucker punching somebody in the face, then next thing we know, we're going to have like, fucking a new Gestapo storming the streets and Richard Spencer is going to be in the White House. So I don't agree with that. And also, I think I agree with Noam Chomsky when Noam Chomsky said that in many respects, Antifa is a gift to the right because it allows them to turn around and say, see, you got these, this violent group of people going around punching people in the face and doing property damage when Milo was going to go give a speech or whatever. And I mean, hey, if you want to be with the reasonable people, join us here on the right. Be with the marauding band of violent lunatics, right? And so I don't think we should, be willy-nilly about that. I think it's actually a really compelling argument. And that, again, I don't want to go as far as to say like, oh, everybody associated in that movement is violent or agrees with violence. But I do think that they need to be a lot more clear about the conversation you and I were having before, which is that, hey, listen, man, we only believe in violence for purely defensive reasons, and we're going to bend over backwards to make sure that's not the case, and that we're not going to do violence when we shouldn't be doing violence. But here's what we're trying to do. We're trying to enact systemic change, and we're trying to do it in a way that's moral and just and ethical. And I feel like if you lead by example with morality and ethics, like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. did, then we go, oh, well, in time, then you're recognized as like, the amazing human being you were, crusading for all of the right things.
Timely recognition is not very important to me, but like actually succeeding in like building political momentum and like winning and actually actually allowing progressive change or forcing government's hand to implement progressive change is what's important to me. And that's why I was saying, and I don't disagree with you in regards to MLK, but that's precisely why I bring up Malcolm X. And what I mentioned there is this is a two-part effort. Actually, there's multiple parties involved, but violent elements within your ranks should not immediately be dismissed, or at the very least, even if you stay away from that, there is definitely a place for that in every movement. Just like there's a place for that and there is already an existing place for that in the Nazi side of things. They do that all the time. I mean, you look at the fucking Coast Guard guy, the lieutenant that just got arrested and was released, where he had an entire arsenal and he had a hit list of Democratic politicians that he wanted to kill, and they let him go.
And you know why he was caught? You know why he was caught? Because he was posting about it on social media, and then so there's a good argument to be made.
I'm not saying do it on social media, Kyle, and I don't think these people do it on social media.
There's a good argument there that because of free speech and because this person was like allowed to voice their shit in the open, that's why he was caught.
Well then, but they released him. That's what the point I was trying to make is that when the administration, look, the example I'll give you is this. So, during the McCarthyist era, when communists and socialists were being hunted, right? Basically being hunted. You know who actually had freedom of speech? The Nazis, the KKK. They were able to walk down the streets and march and exercise their First Amendment rights without fear. And the reason why they were able to do that is because white supremacy is built into the core of this, of like the American understanding of politics. And more importantly than that, racism and misogyny and these sorts of things, especially, but like violent Nazi rhetoric, does not pose a structural threat to the established order. And that's precisely why the establishment will use freedom of speech on them, but won't use freedom of speech as a protective measure when it comes to marginalized communities who are trying to win some political power back, win some autonomy.
They just did with the BDS ruling. They just ruled that, you know, the government cannot suppress pro-Palestinian speech.
Well, that's again, that you have minor victories every now and then after outsized influence, but you still have college. And by the way, I agree, but you still have college professors getting fired from their jobs left and right. You still have, you still have people being blacklisted from all of these platforms. And my point is, they're not actually consistent. Expecting consistency when your opposition is not consistent is, I mean, it's nice, but I don't think it's successful. It's a successful method.
Case law in the U.S. is actually pretty solid in the sense that, yes, not only do the Nazi speech get protected, but also, like the BDS example, you had pro-Palestinian speech that was, now it's protected. So I think the principle is the more important thing. But to get back to your MLK argument, you're right that MLK is preaching peace, okay, and that was part of the movement that was super. And then you did have Malcolm X and many others who were like, fuck this shit, we're going to burn it all down because this is violence against us or whatever. And that mix did make it so stuff got accomplished. And in South Africa, same thing. You had some violent aspects of resistance and then some non-violent. Now, my whole point is, even though I'm accepting that empirically can work, I think it's also possible to bring about change in a way where there isn't that moral ambiguity where there's a question as to whether or not the violence being enacted on our side is good violence. And again, the example I give is a general strike. If we make it so the economy grinds to a halt and so many people participate in a general strike that, everything's not functioning, then they have to listen to us. So in other words, what I'm talking about is basically a more principled and moral and admittedly idealistic idea to enact change. And, but I do understand that there are like very pressing and immediate issues that seem totally unjust to not address. Like when it comes to the example that Destiny gave of his buddy who worked at McDonald's and he was tied to the job because he needed to get the medicine. And if he lost the job, he didn't get the medicine. So he was kind of stuck at McDonald's and it basically was like almost like a jail sentence where you have to be there to work, and if you don't work, then you're not going to get your medicine. And like that is a form of violence. That's certainly a form of structural violence. Work here or else you might die. And you can't even skip a beat or fucking go like try to switch jobs, because then you might have to go a week without your medicine, and that's not possible. So I take that there's so many like, you know, issues with this approach where it's like, it's not perfect. But actually, another way of looking at that is that's all the more reason why something like a general strike should have been like yesterday. You know, like let's all get out there and let's all bring about the change that we have to bring about. And let's try to do it in a way where, you know, it becomes undeniable who the right people are and who the wrong people are. And I take that I know it's a difficult thing, but I have hope. I have hope. And did you get to see Knock Down the House yet? The Netflix documentary that just came out about Justice Democrats? Because
I saw
it has AOC in it, right?
I saw the videos. Like I saw the
AOC,
teasers.
Cori Bush.
Were you in it?
Amy Villela. I'm not in it, and Jank's not in it. But it's basically like all the campaigns themselves and what they were doing on a day-to-day basis. And if you watch that, I guarantee you it'll give both of you so much hope. You'll be like, oh shit, everything's not hopeless.
But Kyle, I agree with you. That's why I'm in a unique position where I love everything you do and promote everything you do in regards to like electoral politics, and still maintain the position that also Chomsky somewhat agrees with me, or at least agreed with me back in the 60s, in regards to how certain forms of violence can be acceptable as long as the moral consequences, as long as it achieves the greater moral good. And something that the chat also mentioned that I love to talk about. Yeah, I'll show you in a second. The legitimacy. It's called the legitimacy of violence as a political act. But it's a nuanced take, and you and I both agree on it. And it's obviously Chomsky's perspective might have changed over the years, but the concept that I'm trying to get everyone familiar with here is that regardless, like caring about outside perception or caring about public perception is, in some instances, especially when it comes to marginalized groups trying to win political power, is always going to be a losing battle. And that's precisely why Martin Luther King had that famous white moderate speech, where he talked about how he was no longer disillusioned with the white moderate who cares more about, the notion of order than, the negative, the white moderate who prefers a negative peace.
It's a good point, but I actually know, I think the exact example that Chomsky gave and what you're talking about, and what he said is, if you have like a whole batch of new weaponry that's going to go over to Vietnam to aid in the genocide that's happening over there, if you had a group of like people who snuck into that factory at night and basically blew up all of the weaponry and the fucking tanks and armament that was about to go to massacre innocent people overseas, that is a defensible form of violence because it is in essence defensive. And again, that's something that I don't see fault with that. I find it hard to argue against certain kinds of violence when the argument is compelling enough that in the context of the structure of the system, it is defensive.
Okay, that's fair. We're in a similar position then.
But I also have zero tolerance for what I think is like bullshitting around that principle to be loose with it. Like I actually want to abide by that principle. And I think that the example he gives is a very good case of it. And having said that, I'll be right back. You guys keep talking. I got to go to the bathroom real quick and grab a drink.
All right, perfect. Getting that seltzer in. I see you. Trihex, you can just fucking tell me to shut the fuck up and butt in whenever you want. I'm sorry for.
No, y'all had some unresolved, sexual tensions. I was letting y'all do your little thing. What I was going to do, what Kyle eventually pivoted into here, was explore the framing of the situation. Right, Richard Spencer was at a rally of some sort. I don't know the exact one you're talking about here, where he was punched or sucker punched, but I wanted to take a second and have y'all go through the simulation of the scenario where like. Well, what if he wasn't punched? What if that punch didn't happen? What could have been the timeline comparatively instead if you didn't resort to if you didn't resort to assertive, progressive violence, I guess you want to call it or whatever. And then you already kind of pseudo skidded around that one, so we kind of didn't really go into it further here. And then you guys brought it briefly here. My other point was going to be about concerning Malcolm X, and that he does get smeared on the right end, I feel, a lot because And at the peak of the negativity, some people will say that, he advocated for a black ethno state. So he's just a black supremacist rather than the opposing white supremacist.
Okay.
Which I wanted to quickly, because that does get smeared a lot. And I'm like, well, I want to kind of debunk on that a little bit, because like he only went for that after the peak of the extreme of opposition he encountered throughout his lifetime with the violence. Where like I believe by the time he like admitted that I'm considering a black ethno state to like, one, raise the standard of humanity because these whites are out here and they're fucking crazy. Two, again, he just wasn't really safe anymore, if I recall, by that point. Like he was just regularly getting threatened by crazy white people left and right. So it was just like trying to like, maybe if I make this, I'll be safe or whatever. It wasn't like he was like proactively going for that kind of thing. I feel like the whole context of whenever that statement was made at one point during his lifetime was kind of like taken and cherry picked in a way to paint him in a really, really bad way.
Yeah, I mean they do that with a lot of. I mean, if they don't do that, the other side is even somehow worse, where they whitewash your history and they act like you weren't a democratic socialist in support of, a democratic socialist completely done with white moderates who consistently told you that your movement was barbaric and that you should sit the fuck down and back up. So ultimately, no matter how you conduct yourself, you still have, you're still going to run into the problems of whatever form of supremacy is prevalent. Like whatever idea is a product of that, like whatever cultural hegemony exists, especially, is going to turn around and vilify you as best as they possibly can while you're actually civilly disobedient or being civilly disobedient. Sorry, I can't even fucking talk anymore. And then once they're done, once you actually achieve momentum and you win, then they'll turn around and turn you into this revised, whitewashed leader with ideas that they can take out of context and use to their own agenda. That's why you see so many conservatives put that fucking quote up about, I dream of from his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. I'm not gonna fucking paraphrase MLK again and fuck it up.
But I got you. Yeah, the revisionist history. Every MLK day without fail, it always happens. You're just like, trust me. I vomited a little bit in my mouth whenever was it
Tommy Lauren has done it.
Tommy Lauren, was it Rand Paul?
They try to claim
Mike Vance. Oh yeah. MLK Jr. was a Republican. Like he was part of the GOP. He was on our side. These crazy leftists right here, yeah, they're wild. They want to take your freedom.
See, but that's what they have to do though. When you get somebody who ultimately was so right about everything he did.
Yeah, but they didn't do that originally. Is what my point was. While he was alive,
you're right.
Well, they killed him. But while he was alive,
I'm not denying that at all. The point is that when the dust clears and everybody knows, like, damn, that guy was like right about everything and way ahead of his time, they have no other way to go. They can't keep arguing against him. I mean, maybe you'll find somebody in like the backwoods of Mississippi wears Confederate flag overalls who might be the one person remaining who's like, yeah, fuck that guy. But like everybody else, now the right has to try to claim him. And I think that's like a sign of, honestly, like the devastating correctness of the left over the years.
Yeah, I just don't, as far as like political figures who are still vilified to this day, like Fred Hampton or Malcolm X, I would say that they were also devastatingly correct as well, and you agreed to that as well. But they're still vilified.
Not on everything. Not on everything, to be clear. Malcolm, I think post Mecca was pretty much right about everything, but pre Mecca, I think he was wrong about quite a bit.
I mean, sure, he was. I don't know enough to.
Yeah, he would have called me a devil because I'm white, and he admitted that. Like he thought all white people were bad. Now, to be fair to him, in his personal experience, all white people were bad to him. But it's obviously
we're all Yakubian devils, okay?
Yeah, it's a fallacy to then say all white people are bad. But he post Mecca, he obviously became a lot more like Martin Luther King. but yeah, I know quite a bit about his life. I studied him in detail, and because I was actually most of all the speakers who I've liked over the years, he was the #1 most captivating speaker to me. I thought that he was like one of the best speakers of all time.
Yeah. But what I was ultimately what I was trying to say is, I mean, they all had some pretty good takes, and some of them are vilified, some of them are revised to fit a more whitewashed narrative of the past. In the case of MLK, but ultimately they were successful in achieving their results. And I look at this more from a pragmatic perspective. And if all else fails, and the administration has shown over and over again that they are not interested in protecting marginalized communities, and that these people have the capacity, these people on the right, like far right, Nazis, have the capacity to come into your community and actually threaten your, not just your livelihood, but your existence by legitimizing violence against you, by dehumanizing you, then I'm not going to stand in front of people who at least try to deplatform them. And if all else fails, after that deplatforming efforts completely fail, take matters into their own hands. It's kind of like, I'm not going to stop someone who, I'm not going to sit here and argue on the ethics of a father, punching a person who raped their daughter in the face in a moment of anger. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to talk about the optics of that either.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying, how there's definitely like gray areas of the morality of violence, and even in certain circumstances, the legality of violence. But to talk about that specific issue, so on the issue of immigration, we might have some disagreements on the issue of what is legitimate and illegitimate. Like, what is a form of political violence that's unacceptable versus what is just kind of,
I can tell you right now,
draconian immigration law.
Targeting civilians. There are obviously radical leftist movements who have been very successful in achieving results, and that would still to this day be considered like terror cells and whatnot, depending on who you're talking to. And I would say that as soon as you go into non-combatant territory, as soon as you are no longer enacting violence against a police force or a military force, and you start targeting civilians specifically to cause commotion or mass terror, then I'm out. And there are plenty of leftists who would argue that that's acceptable as well. That's completely unacceptable for me.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you on that. But I was talking on the flip side of the equation. In other words, what implementation of laws from the state, at what point is it illegitimate authority versus at what point are you just kind of implementing a hawkish, draconian immigration policy that you and I might not agree with, but it also might not necessarily cross a line into being an illegitimate form of political violence.
What do you mean hawkish foreign policy?
So here, I'll give an example. Undocumented immigration versus legal immigration, documented immigration. Do you say that entire distinction is nonsense, or do you say there is a legitimate distinction there? Like, would you say
I personally think it's nonsense.
Violence, or would you say only attempted deportations of documented immigrants are illegitimate forms of violence?
Oh no, I think I make no distinction between undocumented and documented immigrants. I'll admit, I don't think there should be a distinction.
So then, would you say it's a form of illegitimate political violence when the government tries to deport an undocumented immigrant?
Yes, I do think that.
Yeah.
Okay, would you say that if they've been here less than a year?
My personal perspective on that would be yes. I still think it's an illegitimate form of violence. Depending on the circumstances, I might change my perspective.
Committed crimes, violent crimes. What if they've been here less than a year and they've committed violent crimes?
Exactly. In which case, yes, depending on what the crime is, then I don't have an issue with that. No.
Okay, so then I actually think you're pretty reasonable on this, and I think that people have probably misinterpreted a lot of what your perspective on this is, because I've said all along, like, and Obama got a lot of shit for this too, but he did go a little further, which I think was not good. But a pretty high percentage of the undocumented immigrants he deported violent criminals. And there were some on the left who got really mad at him for that. But when I dove into the numbers, I was like, this isn't as unreasonable as people are saying, because a very high percentage of it was undocumented immigrants who were also violent criminals. Now, the problem is, if he does that with non-violent criminals, then I don't like it. And if he does that with undocumented immigrants who weren't violent criminals, then I definitely don't like it. I think maybe the only exception on that front would be a time thing. Like if they've been here less than a certain amount of time, then I think it's actually a little more reasonable if you wanted to deport. But if they've been here for like more than a couple of years or whatever, then it's just gross and you're like ripping somebody out of their life. So well, I don't know. Yeah. I think this is a complex conversation, and very rarely do people treat it with the kind of nuance like we're treating it right now.
Well, I would be curious to see what the numbers are, but I'm fairly certain that like Obama changed the designation of a certain kind of removal, right? Or he started considering like people that were being stopped at the border as deportation as well. No, isn't that the main distinction, and that's why the numbers got beefed up?
I'm not sure, but I'm going to see if I could find the number that I was trying to before. I think it was like 80 something percent, I think.
Before we go further, I think it's important we try to establish the framing here on like what's the average transit time for someone who enters the country to being able to acquire citizenship status. Like I know that this process right now to acquire citizenship is like not an easy one, but I am curious here of the stats on the average time. Like if you like in the country, have a fuck ton of money, are very knowledgeable, and could take the test or whatever, amongst the other things, how long would it take you to actually acquire citizenship from day one?
Yeah, that's average? A good point. Some people, I'm sure they hop the line a little, have money and they have means. This is actually
because you said a year, and I'm like, I don't even think you could get it in a year if you like on average if you try without, unless you already have like a shit ton of money to facilitate the process.
Yeah,
further.
If I'm not mistaken, I think it's like around 5 years on average, but I don't know. Well, some people get it over 10 years.
This is actually one of the arguments that conservatives use to try to bolster their racial politics. Is they talk about how, well, why can't black people do better? Asian people do really well, and they're a minority. Like, what's
oh my god,
but
dude, yeah.
The reason why that's complete and utter bullshit is because it's actually not even totally true, because it depends on specifically which Asian immigrant you're talking about, because as a general rule, Asian immigrants from certain countries do really well economically because they're already coming from money. And then from certain, I forget exactly, don't quote me on this, guys, but I think like Vietnamese immigrants have a lower income per capita compared to from other Asian countries. And so they try to use that argument to put down black people to act like, well, other minorities do well. And it's like, well, no, a lot of the minorities who are doing well by your standards are people who came from money already. So it bolsters actually the left-wing argument when you think about it, because the argument from the left is basically when you give people a chance and you give them equal opportunity and you give them, an economic foot to stand on, well, then they're much more likely to do well and continue that. So I always thought that was so disingenuous of them.
Yeah, well, if you're rushing to find reasons as to why black people are bad and seeking to blame them for the material conditions in which they have had to exist for generations, then you're probably not going to make a distinction between different sects of Asian people, and you're probably not going to care too much about whether they're wealthy or not, because that is just, you're racist.
You're just going to lump them all together. Are you Japanese or Chinese? It's like, all right, well, you got India, Sri Lanka, you got a lot going on there.
Yeah.
They don't even think India is like in Asia, probably, for all we know.
Yo, Kyle, you are a lot further left than Cenk is, though. I think because I constantly criticize Cenk as he just like is not open-minded to reading theory, or he's not even open-minded. Like, he thinks like Chomsky is a joke. You know what I mean?
What? If he thinks Chomsky's a joke,
he thinks anarchy. He thinks anarchy is a meme. Like, he thinks anarchism is like a meme ideology, but mostly because, again, this is and Cenk is a perfect example of this. Okay, a perfect example of what I'm about to say. When you are a product of the best capitalist institutions, my man went to Columbia Law and he went to Wharton Business for undergrad, and he still is completely, it just has a complete blind spot when it comes to leftist theory. And that, and he's incredibly well read, and he's an open-minded guy. But there you have it. This is a testament to how capitalist institutions create this dogma that all manner of leftist theory that achieve, that are very well respected in academia all around the world are considered nonsense and oftentimes ignored, or worse, vilified by our institutions.
Yeah, he actually has said more. But you know what? Over the years, to be fair to him, he has inched further and further left. There was a time when he said he was for a public option and not for Medicare for all. And there was also a time where he was in agreement with Destiny on trade, and now he's more with us on trade. So he has, and even on intervention, he used to say, I'm a mild interventionist. And now he's gone more leftist in his, and more non-interventionist in his approach. Now, we'll know he's there when he starts talking about non-intervention, but also brings up U.S. imperialism and brings up international law in the conversation. Right now, he still doesn't view foreign policy through the perspective of, okay, do we even have a right to do what we're doing? Do we even have a right to intervene in Venezuela? Because once you even have that conversation, you're buying into a premise, and that premise is international law is irrelevant. We can do whatever we want to do. It's our choice. And he's still stuck on that very American-centric level of analysis where it's like everything's possible and everything's a conversation, and you don't bring into the conversation international law and whether or not we have a right to do these things, which that's the thing that always appealed to me most about Chomsky was I always said about him, he's the last person on the planet that actually gives a shit about international law. What makes him so genius is he does the very basic thing of let me apply the law and see what's going on here. And as he famously said, and this was viewed as super scandalous, although it's kind of obvious if you do the reading on it, he said every post-World War II U.S. president would have been hanged if the Nuremberg trials were upheld. Yeah. And that's a badass quote.
Yeah, I love Chomsky. He's definitely one of my favorite theorists, so I don't have you and I definitely agree on that. I just wish Jank would be more open-minded to reading some stuff, whether it be Chomsky or even people like Richard Wolff, or maybe even more radical people. Maybe we could get him to start reading, ultimately get him to read Das Kapital and at least understand the basics of Marxist orthodoxy. You know what I mean?
So yes, I do. And I've always liked Richard Wolff. I've always liked Chomsky from the very beginning. And I started reading him when I was really young. Same. But Richard Wolff, though, I didn't like him at first, and then he won me over. So Richard Wolff has a special place in my heart because I'm a tough guy. Once I'm fuck this, it's tough to get me back. But he got me back. And I was like, oh, shit, this guy's actually making really good points.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and that's really important. A lot of people, I had a very long conversation with one of my fans the other day, 2 days ago, about precisely this, where they were like, why don't you platform even more radical leftist thinkers and more radical leftist theorists? Why don't you actually go balls to the wall with your perspective and try to start bread pilling people with theory instead of showing these these more moderate people like Richard Wolff, like Marxian economists who still try to abide by liberal sensibilities. And that's precisely why, because Richard Wolff is very effective, just like you are very effective. You and I might have our disagreements on certain things, but ultimately you are doing a very important job by changing people's minds. Just like Destiny and I disagree on certain things, but ultimately he has a very different appeal, just like you have a very different appeal and a very different place in our I guess our movement or our revolution.
Well, I think the reason why there are some people who are, like Marxists who might not like me, although many do, to be fair, there are plenty of people who are like Marxists who like me, but I think
all the Marxists in my chat love you right now.
Okay, see, well that's
you were
good.
Dunking on Destiny with those hot protectionist takes. So
there's plenty of people to my left who don't like me, but I think it's because I actually do fundamentally believe in reform. I get
well, I do too.
the system is so fucked up that the gut reaction is like, burn it all down. We need like a revolution or whatever. But I just think that the only way we actually practically get that change that we need is through reform. So basically, I'm that last stop on the train, still within the context of the society we're living in. Like, I'm still going to fight tooth and nail under this current structure of bullshit in order to get the reform that's necessary. And I think that the only way we can sit back in 40, 50 years and have a cigar and talk about how we achieve something is if we buy into the rules of that game. Because the right is playing that game 24/7, and the centrist Democrats are playing that game 24/7. And if we cede the ground to them, then all right, then that's what we're going to get. We're either going to get neoliberal centrism, or we're going to get, neoconservative, laissez-faire, deregulatory madness. And
which also is neoliberal centrism, kind of, in many ways now. Virtually indistinguishable in some avenues. But
yeah,
actually,
so it's tough.
Yeah.
Well, could I actually ask y'all a question? I hate to.
I'm gonna go pee. You guys talk for a second. I have to pee.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. See, actually, I was gonna ask you, ask you and Hasan, Kyle, about if you recall back about, I'd say 2 weeks ago, right? There was the CNN town halls that happened all like 2 Mondays ago. If you recall, it was like 5 Dems in a row, and everyone kept asking me about, where's Andrew Yang? Where's Andrew Yang? And I was like, well, I don't know. But I'm really sad that he's not able to get a platform to talk more about UBI and stuff like that. And then some people come at me and ask me like, well, why do you give a shit so much about Andrew Yang? And I'm like, well, I don't think that Andrew Yang has the potential to win 2020 election at all. But I think he's a very valuable contribution to the total, the race to get to the Democratic primary, because UBI is such like a, I don't want to frame it as like a leftward policy. I know it technically originates on the right here, but I do think that UBI is a great start to fixing some of the problems we have right now. It kind of grew on me after a while. And I'm like, well, having the value of having Andrew Yang out there and bringing UBI or freedom dividends, whatever you want to call it, to the mainstream dialogue of what you want out of your policy specifics from your candidates thus far is a good thing. Ultimately, if you want to call it, let's just hypothetically call it, a leftward policy for argument's sake here. Like, by having someone very left on, you're gonna force these like centrist Dems and other ones to have to like pivot a little bit further in that direction. So they become like, when they dilute to like right wing influence, they're gonna have to be a little more left and survive that onslaught. Which I think is ultimately a good thing. Like, if hypothetically here we get Joe Biden, for example, I don't think there's no way Joe Biden, hypothetically here, if he like got far in the race, is gonna really get very far. He's at least admitting to getting, I'm for Medicare for all. Right?
No, Sean King earlier leaked that Joe Biden is most likely going to be against Medicare for all.
Yeah, he's the public option. So he immediately.
He's going to flop, right?
Earlier today, he also just came out and said, I support Trump and John Bolton with, meddling in Venezuela.
Oh yeah, that really fucking pissed me off too. Holy shit.
He's a piece of shit. He's a fucking piece of shit, and he's posturing, and he doesn't care about any of the important issues. And fuck him. But no, to get to
oh my god,
Andrew Yang, I actually agree with you. Now, Andrew Yang gets a lot of shit because when he went on Joe Rogan's podcast, a lot of the people in the audience, Joe's got plenty of right wingers who watch him, a lot of the right wingers ended up liking Andrew Yang, and so now on like a lot of Reddit forums, you have like a lot of the Pepe crowd is now all of a sudden with Andrew Yang. And so as a result of that, somewhat understandably, somewhat annoyingly, many people on the left were just like, all right, well, fuck this guy then, because the assholes like him, so fuck him. But
right.
I tend to agree more with you that I like his voice. I think it's necessary in the conversation. Now, at the same time, if you go into the specifics of Andrew Yang's platform, he's a hell of a lot more libertarian than I am. And he's a hell of a lot more, he's let like his entrepreneurial side kind of leak into his politics. So he's for example, he's one of the things on his website is he's in favor of doing a sunset provision on all of the regulations in our economy, which I think is crazy.
Holy
because that
shit!
means
I
that
never even saw that. What the?
No,
fuck?
actually, I was going to bring them up. I'm like, because he says I think the time duration is what, every 7 years.
something like that, 5, 7.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah,
remember exactly.
yeah. I was just like, yeah, that is a nuclear take. I don't know if I agree with that at all, honestly.
There's a lot of shit. See, that's my point, is that there's plenty of stuff that's like too super libertarian for my take. However, I still think he should be in the debates. And by the way, he is going to be in the debates. He already reached the over 65,000 donor threshold, so he's going to be in the debates. That's a guarantee.
Cool.
And also, CNN did host him for a town hall. It was just on a different night than the night where they had like the 5 of them. So,
oh fuck, I must have missed it then. Shit.
So he is getting some mainstream appeal. Now, to the question about UBI, I agree with you, and I think we need to be clear when we talk about this. There's one version of UBI that's a Trojan horse, and it's a right-wing idea. And then there's another version of UBI, which is not a Trojan horse, it's not a right-wing idea, and it's a wonderful idea. The Trojan horse idea is, hey, let's do this UBI thing where you get $1,000 a month. But, at the same time, let me get rid of your Medicaid, let me get rid of, Social Security, let me get rid of food stamps, let me get rid of every single social safety net program, and let me not just give you the equivalent of benefits you were receiving through the social safety net program as a UBI payment. Let me give you less than what you were having through the regular social safety net. That's the Trojan horse UBI idea, where it's like ultimately a benefit cut for people, even though it's a flat payment of cash.
Right.
Now, the good UBI, which is the kind of UBI that I 100% support, is we're going to do UBI and we're not going to cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, yada,
So
yada.
hypothetically, if you have like 5 kids and you're getting like $2,000 in food stamps a month, you would continue to get your EBT in addition to the 1,000 from UBI.
That's
right.
in the
As opposed to the two conflicting together, and you're like, okay, well, I can only pick either one or. So.
Right. Now, I prefer that, but I'm even open to the idea of UBI limiting the social safety net, but doing UBI, but I still want more of the payment. So, in other words, I would not support any system in which there is a net benefit cut. Okay? But if there's a UBI system and it's either equal to or more than what they're already getting in the social safety net, that's good. If it's a cut, bad. If it's an increase, good. That's basically my philosophy on it. Now,
but the problem is that Yang doesn't want or from what I've seen with Yang briefing on it so far here, like you mentioned here, it's unfortunately the Trojan horse thing where you if you already have benefits, you're in competition with the UBI. Is that correct?
I think so. So yeah, it might be a little bit of a Trojan horse. However, I would like to talk to him about it because I want to ask him if he would add a provision that's like, you can't have a net benefit cut. Like, in other words, if you get rid of the other assistance that you're getting, then your UBI goes from $1,000 a month to, let's say, for argument's sake, $1,600 a month because you were getting $600 worth of benefits before. You see what I'm saying? Like, if he would add something like that, then I totally support it. But if he's not going to add that, then yeah, you're right. It's just a Trojan horse and it's a libertarian idea. And for the record, Milton Friedman supported this, and that's the version he supported.
And Nixon.
He basically, his argument was like, let's get rid of all the social safety net, and I'll give you a flat payment. But that flat payment was obviously going to be net less than it would have been if you just kept the safety net. So yeah, it's like, again, it's a complicated conversation, and I feel like the internet doesn't do it enough justice when they just, because I've now seen, and this kind of annoys me, not gonna lie, a lot of lefties who are just like, well, I'm not for UBI, and it's just like, wait, what if I tell you that you get more? And they're like, bro, I'm not for it. What do you mean you're not for it? If I'm telling you you're getting more,
they're not for it because they find some leftists, and I think in theory this is an understandable perspective that they have. They find all manner of state reform they find all manner of state reform a problem because it marginally improves the living conditions of working class Americans, but it's actually just an extension of capitalism. It's like it's like a Band-Aid to a gaping wound kind of solution, and it gives lifeline to the continuation of capitalism and the continued destruction on the planet and everything else. So like it's I wouldn't say it's necessarily an accelerationist perspective, but I understand on theoretical grounds why they have an argument against UBI, because
Yeah.
And a similar argument can be made about welfare, and a similar argument can be made about all these other state reforms that most wealthy people now are comfortable with, because behind closed doors they call them riot tax.
Yeah, I'm ultimately like, this gets back to what we were talking about before, which is like, are you a versus are you a let's just overthrow it completely? And I fundamentally believe that the only way we get anything done is by reforming. So I'm from top to bottom reform, and by that logic, I can't find it in me to be against UBI as long as you're getting a net benefit increase. So again, I take the argument to Haas, particularly because Professor Wolf made it, and I deeply respect Professor Wolf.
I don't know about Professor Wolf's arguments. This has like been my position from day one, though.
Oh, he's against UBI, and he's basically against UBI kind of for the reason you laid out. But yeah, fundamentally, I'm a little bit more of a reformer, so I'm fine with, like, I think we should do the tweaks around the edges, but I think they should be massive, massive tweaks.
Yeah, and by the way, I agree with your perspective on not using UBI to, not using UBI as a replacement, and the Trojan horse UBI, all that stuff I've addressed from day one in regards to Andrew Yang, when people were like, "Why don't you like Andrew Yang? He seems very progressive."
He also backed off of Medicare for all, by the way.
Yeah, that is like an immediate no right off the bat. His concessions to like his understanding of how like a technocratic utopia could exist under capitalism, while also using like kind of watered down Marxist terminology to describe the material conditions that have led to such devastating poverty, is really interesting. Andrew Yang is a very interesting character.
I
uses
totally
a lot of
agree with that
Marxist
analysis.
terminology. He's very skilled at communicating his opinions and taking advantage of like Marx's ideas even. But
well, the other thing I disagree with him about is actually a similar disagreement that we were having with Destiny earlier, where Destiny kind of has this naturalistic explanation for trade. Like, well, this is kind of just what happens. If you have this system, and the system's going to evolve and progress, and this is the natural evolution, this is the natural progression. So we have outsourcing, and that's just par for the course. And you got to like that. And Andrew Yang describes our movement towards automation like that. And he basically argues when it comes to trade and when it comes to automation, like, there's no like rolling back the clock on this stuff or anything. And I actually just fundamentally disagree with that. In very clear and specific ways, you can roll back the clock. You just have to do it. So like on trade, okay, sorry, we're ripping up NAFTA, we're ripping up Trump's new NAFTA, and we're coming up with a new trade deal, and that new trade deal is going to be better for workers. Fucking, that's what it is. That's what we're going to do. And they have this particularly Yang has this argument of like, well, I mean, trade has ruined this country, and so we got to deal with the fallout. It's like, or no, we could actually fundamentally address the core of the problem with it. So I think that that's his entrepreneurial and libertarian side that kicks in, where he views like any kind of drastic and negative change in the economy as just like something that needs to be mitigated, as opposed to something that needs like core reform to totally change it.
Yeah. Wait, so someone told me that you had a conversation with him in which he backed off the point that that he would substitute like EBT and welfare spending for UBI credits. I mean, if you were going to get that, or did he not do that?
I've never talked to him. I think they might be referring to, and I'm going to plug this right now and recommend it for because it was wonderful. Humanist Report, Mike Figueredo. He did an interview with Andrew Yang, and dude, it is deeply substantive. And what else is substantive? Jimmy Dore spoke to him too, and Jimmy Dore asked him, about $15 minimum wage, and he doesn't support it.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's
So there's
really, I don't know. He is an enigma.
Man.
He has a lot of like weird takes. Like he has a lot of like weird neoliberal technocratic takes, and then he also wants UBI, which is somewhat more progressive. It's still like, I mean, it's fairly cutting edge in comparison to like even social democrats in European nations. So it is shocking. But
yeah,
all right. So let me y'all go. I'm starting alpha now. Look, y'all, I never get to get in anymore. Okay, so let's rewind way back here. So so we can agree that Yang's implementation of UBI is mixed at best. I can agree with that because of the net loss that comes to some benefits for majority of those currently on benefits right now, as Kyle brought up earlier here. But now the counterpoint there is okay. So if UBI is just extending capitalism, which I think most of you here can agree, minus Destiny, can agree here that that's ultimately not going to be a good. It's really why you're bringing up the whole idea that it's a band-aid ultimately. Let's bring it back here to the thing that I did read about in AOC's draft proposal with Green New Deal about job guarantee. Do you guys feel that any kind of implementation of a job guarantee would be a better thing than UBI?
Yes.
But we're just selling for UBI right now because we can't get job guarantee anytime soon. Do you think that job guarantee can come from anyone this decade?
So I actually don't agree with the universal job guarantee, and I also don't like the way the Green New Deal has been crafted thus far. I think that with the Green New Deal, they basically just put together like almost every left-wing idea that they like and put in the bill. Like they literally put Medicare for all in the Green New Deal. And I'm like, what? Like, why didn't you just do Medicare for all separately? Like, I don't understand.
Well, can you
want to make it more popular? Probably?
I feel like
right.
From what I saw of it, it was like just like a it was a draft proposal meant to be like pushed to another district, and then it's not even like really like a thing. It's just like here's a big list of ideas. If you sign behind it, you get marketing points on the left, But someone needs to actually like make it happen and make it tangible in real time.
Yeah, but like in reality, this is part of a broader problem, in my opinion, with left politics, particularly when you get to electoral politics, is that by definition, the left is a little bit skeptical of like central authority because they view it as like dictatorship-like or fascist-like or tyrannical or authoritarian. And so they kind of let everybody in the room have a voice when it comes to crafting the legislation. And then by the end of the day, when you're talking about what's going to be in the Green New Deal, you have like 7 very different, distinct, non-climate related things that are going in the bill. And then it's easy to caricature because it's like, we can do all those things, but let's do them separately. I fundamentally don't agree with the throw it all in one. I think Green New Deal should have been focused specifically on getting us off of fossil fuels and doing like a green and renewable technology jobs program and infrastructure program. And it should narrowly be focused on those things because those things alone are big enough. And you're talking about a couple $1 trillion being spent on that front. You know what I mean? So
Isn't the Green New Deal more of like a manifesto almost though, like guidelines that progressives should abide by, and that's probably part of the reason why they include Medicare.
But that's what we're saying. It shouldn't be.
Our platform should be separate.
Yeah, platform. Yeah, it's not legislation, is it?
Well, no, but eventually they're gonna have to do legislation on it if they want.
Correct. Yeah. There's not like in the thing is the Green New Deal right now. There are not specifics to actually execute these things. They're just like, we should do these things.
Right,
and that's grounded in actuality. Like, there's no actual mandate. There's no proposed proper budget for the specific execution of any of those things.
Now, Tulsi Gabbard has a bill called the Off Act, which gets us off of fossil fuels, and that I support that 100%. And that's like a more specific version of what the general idea of the Green New Deal is supposed to be. But I'm sorry, what was the original question? I actually forgot it because I talk too much.
The original question was, do you find that a job guarantee would be a better thing to propose than what we know as Andrew Yang's UBI right now?
I kind of disagree with you there, Kyle, but I want
to follow up here that if you do like it, I'm sorry.
Haas, you can make the case if you want, man, because I was originally not for UBI, and now I'm to UBI, so it's conceivably possible I can be convinced about the job guarantee. But I think that I'm fundamentally, like, I want to have a mixed market economy, and that includes aspects of capitalism. So I think we should have a strong public sector and public sector jobs that exist. But I also think having private sector jobs is fine too. The idea of implementing a jobs guarantee, I think you get a little bit too close to the idea of, okay, we're going to hire this dude to go cut somebody's grass with fucking nail clippers because at least he's got a job. And I don't think that makes sense.
Don't you feel like we already have that kind of in the public sector with our military, though? So effectively, wouldn't that be similar to
the jobs are actually real and that they're building shit. However, I agree with you that our welfare in this country is warfare, and it shouldn't be. We should have an economy that's geared towards other things. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So the way I see it is kind of similar to the military, but obviously not to fucking go out and do imperialism in other nations, but instead having a jobs guarantee effectively works like having a gigantic operation similar to the military that focuses on rebuilding infrastructure, building housing, even public housing, and other things that are going to be greatly beneficial, and opening up more opportunities for more opportunities for like future generations to be able to focus on research and whatnot. And then beyond that, it's probably a testament to the old New Deal at the time with the implementation of the Civilian Engineer Corps. So I think that was not a jobs guarantee, but that was 2 million additional jobs that focused on rebuilding America's infrastructure at the time, something that we benefit from tremendously to this day.
Dude, I think he actually, hold on, I'm looking now. I'm actually pretty sure FDR supported a job guarantee, dude.
Yeah,
he
the
did.
Civilian Conservation Corps is basically what that is. Like,
okay, let me read this. Let me read this for you. This is the FDR's second Bill of Rights. He proposed that every American has the right to, the first one is a job. Holy shit.
Yeah.
A job,
Damn.
an adequate wage and a decent living, a decent home, medical care, economic protection during sickness, accident, old age, or unemployment, and a good education. Dude, that he basically laid out like the entire modern day left agenda.
Pog champ. Damn.
Yeah, I mean, FDR was, again...
Now, just for emphasis here, can you provide is there like a year attached to when he particularly said that?
Yeah,
I don't know which term it was.
In a very famous speech from the White House in 1944, he did a speech where he spoke about proposing a second Bill of Rights, an economic Bill of Rights for Americans, and this is what he said. And if you just go to Google Images and type in FDR's economic Bill of Rights, it'll come up and you'll see it. You can read right through it. But how do you respond to this, Haas? Because this is another thing that popped in my mind when I heard about the job guarantee. And this may sound like a trivial thing, but I actually don't think it's that trivial. Don't you think that will actually stigmatize people who can't work for whatever reason, or people who, in rare circumstances, for totally legitimate reasons, don't want to work?
Oh, don't get me wrong. Fuck work. Like, ultimately, we should be working towards... That's why I'm, like, pro-automation, unlike some leftists. But, no, fuck work. I think work should always be meaningful, and work should give you a sense of purpose and a sense of happiness. And anything that doesn't contribute to that, it goes against, like, humanity, what we should be trying to achieve for humanity. I hate work. But currently, as it stands, work in this fashion, especially if they're fairly compensated, is a good thing. And again, it goes back to work is a very good and very easy way to build class consciousness, to build some labor momentum, and therefore some political power. Give back, stimulate the working class to actually force the establishment Democrats and even Republicans to meet their demands for once.
If I can ask you here real quick about that, would you mind elaborating on this thing? Because I feel like this is like a nuclear take that I didn't know was even a thing for the left. Like, there are people who oppose automation, but it's more like they're saying, hey, look, technology is advancing. This is clearly the inevitable next step in terms of like what was the assembly line back, the previous century. But I oppose it because human rights. But rather than wanting the regulations of human labor to modernize along with automation.
No, let me explain. Sorry. Many workers, many like unions are really not happy about the movement towards automation. And it's actually for a perfectly rational reason, because it's not like if we move towards automation, then it's like immediate that all of society benefits from that and we get more leisure as a result of it. Quite clearly, actually, Stephen Hawking spoke about this in a very powerful way that kind of gave me a light bulb moment. He basically said, unless we do radical reform of the system, this could lead to like the breakdown of society, because if you have all these jobs moving towards automation, and then it's only the business owners who are seeing the fruits of that labor, well, then everybody's unemployed and poor and pissed the fuck off. And so that genuinely destabilizes society, especially when you have like young men who have nothing to do, no hope, no future, and now fucking any potential job has now been taken by a goddamn robot. So, but the counter argument to that, and this is what Stephen Hawking said, and this is what Hasan was basically touching on before, is that it is theoretically possible, and Professor Wolf says this too, it is theoretically possible to make automation be a totally wonderful thing, because if, let's say we have automation and all of us get 3 fucking robots that do endless work assigned to us, and we get the fruits of that labor, and everybody gets the fruits of the labor of 3 different robots, well, then we all basically become rich and we all have earned leisure time through the labor of this machine. And it's just that's like a very utopian kind of future. But the crazy thing is, like, it's such an obvious, logical, rational way to like make the future bright. But right now, we're obviously headed more down the path of when the automation happens, like 90% of the country will be fucking screwed and 10% will benefit.
Okay, so here's the heart of the problem, and I hate to repeat myself over and over again, but it is capitalism. That is absolutely at the core. Our understanding of remuneration under capitalism is precisely the problem. Where that class antagonism is the reason why we fear technology. Even Keynes thought that the 15-hour work week would have been achieved at this point. And where are we? We're not at a 15-hour work week. We're at a 50-hour work week. And our wages have remained stagnant while productivity has skyrocketed. And it's exactly that same concept that makes automation something terrifying for the future of America. When it shouldn't be. It should be a beautiful thing.
You want to know a crazy fact?
What?
FDR, during the New Deal, we almost got a 30-hour work week. We were this close, and then there was like a backroom deal where there was a trade-off in another area, and 30-hour work week was off the table. But we were so close to a 30-hour work week. Imagine if with the New Deal, we got a 30-hour work week. Everybody would be so much happier and less stressed and shit. I'm a big proponent of. Like,
so that would have meant like that would have meant like four-day work weeks, right? Like 4-day work weeks, 3-day weekends. Yes. Holy shit!
And that's a big I feel like one of the issues that the left doesn't talk about enough, but we should, and we should start adding it in the conversation with like living wage and Medicare for all, is like right to paid vacation time or like a 30-hour work, because other developed countries have like a month off paid by law every year. Like you just get them all of a month off. Like you basically have a summer vacation as an adult in many developed countries. Like why the fuck do we have it here where it's like, no, you just got to basically work and maybe if you're lucky you get a week off?
If you're lucky, you get like I feel like most big boy jobs now, it's like you're lucky if you get 14 days of PDO, pay days off.
That's right.
And that's it, really.
We don't even have.
And then if you get sick, like you burn, like you have to like I don't know, like come out of pocket on some obscene doctor expense to get a doctor's note to not have your days off count against you on that as well. Yeah, it's really toxic.
And that should be a big issue for us because it's like how easy is it to sell so many of these left ideas to people? Like, hey, I think you should get a month off paid. People, no, who's gonna be like, fuck you, bro?
Well, it's funny you say that because during the Bernie Fox News town hall, dude, I felt like it was in the Twilight Zone because like he would throw out these things and I just couldn't tell if I don't know if you guys saw the Bernie Fox News town hall that happened the week before, about 3 weeks ago now. Well, his audience was full of, I can tell it was like Bernie fans. I don't know if they like pre-screened the audience to like get some, I don't know, some typical conservative people in or not. But like whenever Bernie was throwing out what I felt like were just like obvious, like neutral, I don't say neutral, like all encompassing, like pro-populist policies. Like if you're a human in the USA and you're in the working class, meaning you're not in the top, like, I don't know, the top 20%, you clearly benefit from these whole things here in every possible way possible. When he's throwing out, pay time off by law or paid maternity leave off by law, for men and women, different times if I recall correctly. All these things, like he got wild cheers. And I feel like that, this exactly is what would happen if he ever got to a primary Democratic position on the debate stage.
That's right.
It's on there one time and it's game over. Like you can spin whatever you want, but the minute he says those things, like, how can you oppose it?
Exactly. That's the argument that I've made for so long now is that populism cuts across party lines and works because populism actually gets to the real divide in the country, which is like owner class versus regular people, working people. And it's like once people realize that that's the actual divide, and then we start having a conversation that's in line with that philosophy, well, then it's game, set, match. And as we've seen, the polls just came out last week, internal polling in the Bernie Sanders campaign. He's up by like 12 points in all the swing states, all the Rust Belt states, which are a lot of swing states. So that's why Trump won is because of the Rust Belt. Bernie's crushing Trump in those states. And the reason he's crushing Trump is because Bernie is an actual populist. That's Bernie's fighting for Medicare for all. He's fighting for free college. He's fighting for a living wage. He's fighting to make sure that, you know, working people get treated fairly and we have a system that's just. And people get it, man. And when people get it, like, look out, because you will have plenty of, and I'm covering this story on my show tomorrow. I actually have to go because I still have to finish up prepping for my show. But one of the stories I'm covering is there's a dude who called into C-SPAN, and he's a Republican voter. And the guy's like, listen, man, I'm a regular dude, like, but I voted for Trump last time because I thought he was going to break up the establishment and help out regular people like me, and he didn't do it. So in the next election, I'm voting for Bernie. And I was like, oh, shit, this is exactly what I've been saying, man. Like,
yeah, dude.
People, everybody on the Democratic side, like the actual Democratic voters, the left, even the centrist Democratic voters, they hate Trump so much, they'll vote for Bernie in a general election.
You know who won't vote for Bernie, though? The wealthy.
That's what I was just about to get to also. The one tiny sliver of people that won't vote for him are the well-off. And that includes, like, all, like, the Morning Joe goons. Like, they act like they're so woke now. But then one of them said it on the show. Donnie Deutsch, I think his name is. He was like, if it comes down to Bernie versus Trump, I'll have to vote for Trump. And it's like, yeah, and Michael Brooks says it best. He says capital breaks fascist. And that's what would happen.
Well, I mean, that's technically not Michael Brooks's quote. That's basically all of history.
Yeah.
They all, leftists, if you listen to leftists, they'll tell you, you cut a liberal and a fascist bleeds. And that's why they say it, because a lot of liberals that love democracy leading up to the fascist mobilization in the 1930s, all of a sudden did not care for democracy as much and started offering structural and material support to the Nazi Party and the fascists. Because the wealthy capital owners will always side with whoever will ensure their best interest. And their best interest happens to be depressing wages and keeping the underclass just well-fed enough that they can continue to create, but not so, but to ensure that they don't actually cause any sort of serious uprising.
If you look at the election map for the 2016 Democratic primary in New York, my state, and you broke it down, Bernie versus Hillary, look at the areas that Bernie won, look at the areas that Hillary won. It is so telling because all the areas Hillary won were like these little dots of densely populated areas where the average income is pretty high. So you had like Westchester County, the county I live in, Hillary won the entire county and won it decisively. In the rich areas of the city, Hillary won it and she won it decisively. Everywhere else, Bernie won. He won all of upstate New York. He won all the areas of the city that are not high income. And this is exactly the dynamic that we're talking about, Haas. It's that when you have wealthy folks and when you have concentrations of wealth and power, they always break more towards the status quo. Whereas when you have a real populace coming around, he gets all the people who are, middle class or working class. But that dynamic around the country is devastating in a general election because I honestly think Bernie would beat Trump with over 300 electoral votes if he gets through the primary. The primary is actually the hard part for Bernie, in my opinion.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah.
Especially because Democrats are fucking feckless. Like the Democratic voter base is a bunch of absolute cowards. They have been effectively neutered by the Democratic establishment and also by the media apparatus that we know now works side by side with the Democratic establishment. They've built in to the core of being a Democrat. For some weird reason, they've been able to successfully build in this notion, this understanding that, like, you have to vote for whoever is electable. And who's electable? Well, whoever we tell you is electable is who's actually electable. And turns out that's not the case. But it doesn't matter. It's so powerful. This message is so pervasive that people still think that Joe Biden could be successful and that Bernie is too far left, only because that's what they hear in the news.
Dude, check out, and again, I'm going to plug something here, the Citations Needed podcast with Nima Shirazi and Adam Johnson.
I love Citations Needed.
Dude, they spoke about this notion of electability on one of their podcasts, and they just destroy the whole notion. Because, the whole point of just talking about electability, the whole point of it is to gaslight the country and act like the only people who you should even consider supporting are these like insane status quo defending establishment hacks, because they're the only ones who have electability and can maybe beat Trump in the general election. And it's like, no, you're just gaslighting us to try to force us towards, your preferred candidates, the candidates that are going to represent wealth and concentrated power. And it's so fucking frustrating when you see that, man. I've spoken about this dynamic that I've seen in the media where they love to, as they control the narrative, they pretend like they're just calling balls and strikes. So, like, they'll, you pick an issue. A good one is Joe Biden. They'll scream from the rooftops from the very beginning, way before he even announced, Joe Biden,
he's the man. Well, with Buttigieg.
But with Buttigieg, he's an even better example.
Perfect.
You're so right about that, because they pumped him out there. Oh my God, he's surging the polls. Oh my God, he's doing so well. Look at these 9,000 fluff pieces we did on him. But wait a second, you were saying that even before it was true, and then you basically willed it into reality by controlling the narrative and pretending like you're just telling it like it is, when you actually were creating his popularity by relentlessly pushing him. And
don't forget that they love to use that controlled sample size in their polling data. Like they'll quickly be like, they'll use only like 65 plus and older when they want to get like they'll want to frame
an accurate take. Trihex. That's what they want. They want the truth. That's what's
exactly right.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah.
Go to the senior center.
Biden is surging in the polls. By the way, this poll is only under controlled base of 65 plus year old voters.
That was so disgusting. Young
people at all.
That was God.
That's typical though. It's what they do.
That's right, and it's so annoying because they're trying to make everybody go, well, I guess obviously, but no, like they're forcing that on us. Imagine if Bernie got the positive coverage that Buttigieg was getting.
Dude, imagine if by the way, I'm sorry, I had to bring up the CNN town hall, but it was so fucking disgusting how they framed that one question about would you let an incarcerated person vote. Like they took that one question, immediately got smeared on Fox News as soon as the thing was done on CNN's town hall. But not only that, they would go back. They went back and asked both Buttigieg and Kamala Harris that Bernie said he would let the Boston bomber vote. How do you feel about that? And it's like, oh my God, dude, this framing is
the girl
garbage.
Originally did mean like she did say Boston bomber, so he was just reiterating. But still, you are correct. They absolutely were using that to weaponize that take against Bernie Sanders, and I think he handled it gracefully, and I think he did a great job. Kyle, do you disagree? Do you think?
I do. I actually did a really long segment on this because I think that they are really working overtime to try to figure out how to take it down. And I think they've kind of learned, and this was actually mentioned in one of the on this, which surprised me. But apparently this like little cabal of anti-Bernie Sanders establishment hacks, including Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, David Brock, and all them, like they realized, hold on, every time we like go after Bernie and are upfront about it, it only helps him. Like he's only gone up in the polls when we've done that. Like the harder we go after him, the more it appears like he does better. So what the hell? How are we going to take him down? And they came up with a brilliant answer to that question. And the answer is, what if we took like the tiny, handful of issues? There's so few issues where Bernie is not with the majority of the people. And they said, just let's find those issues and let's try to get Bernie to focus on those issues and keep talking about the issues where he disagrees with Americans, so that the more he talks about it, he can't win. The more he talks about it, the more he's reminding Americans, hey, I'm not with the majority of Americans on this issue. And it's just a brilliant strategy because you get him to almost undermine himself and undercut himself. And they successfully did it because Bernie's team also took the bait. And not only did he answer the question that night, since then, he's answered it like 2 or 3 more times and even doubled down in a weird op-ed where he said, I think criminals should vote even like fucking Michael Cohen and Paul Manafort or some shit. So I think, listen, if I was in that room with Bernie now, I'd be coaching him in a significantly different way than what they're doing, because I think they actually took the bait and what happened hurt him. Now, the question is it enough where like Joe Biden actually overtakes him or some other candidate actually overtakes him? It's too soon to tell, and it's hard to actually parse it out and determine how much of it is that what happened. But I don't think it was good for him. I don't.
Oh, no. I wasn't talking about electability or popularity. I was trying to figure out what your personal perspective is on allowing prisoners to vote, and if you think it's good or not.
So I did a poll on this because my mind isn't made up. I'm still kind of waffling on this a little bit. I think that for sure, when you served your sentence, you 100% get the right to vote.
Right, I agree with that.
I also kind of am okay with the idea of like non-violent offenders being able to vote even when incarcerated, particularly because I think for so many non-violent crimes, they shouldn't even be crimes in the first place. So I think it's gross to take away their rights for that. But I'm not sold yet on the idea that if you're like a murderer, rapist, or a terrorist or something, that like, you know, it's and I don't like how many on the left have been so flippant about this, and they've acted like, what do you mean? Bernie's obviously right. No, he's not obviously right. I mean, when you go to prison, a lot of your rights are taken away. So I don't see why it's so egregious that this other one is like, well, maybe this one goes away while you're incarcerated too. So I don't really know what I think about it. I just know that 75% of Americans disagree with Bernie, and it was a political mistake.
Okay, that's a really interesting perspective. Trihex, do you have a point that you want to make about this?
Yeah, I agree with the points brought up here that once you're if you're a violent person, it should be treated differently than if you're a non-violent offender. I would go as far as to say this question. I don't know, if I was like in Bernie's situation here, I'd have to like change the framing and be like, well, right now, as long as we have people who are incarcerated for stupid reasons, I don't know, we want to call it like non-violent drug charges, or what's the other major one they get people for that's like really like, it's kind of like a private prison reason. There's like I thought there was like 2 reasons for this, but yeah, let's just go with like non-violent weed and drug offenses, right? As long as you can get like incarcerated for something obscene like that for a long period of time, I feel like it's immoral to impede on their ability to vote because they weren't even incarcerated for what I feel is like a valid thing in the first place. So that has to change first. Yeah, that has to change first. But
you were right to frame it like that. I was mad Bernie didn't say exactly what there.
I too. No, so I agree in that regard. He took the bait because he didn't like immediately pivot that. Because then once you frame it in that way, then you can continue to say, yeah, I would allow the bomber to vote.
Yeah.
Once you frame it like that, they win because that's all they were trying to get you to say, and you just said it.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. He could have. I don't know. He honestly needs to be a little bit more like Trump when he's given smear questions and when he's treated shitty from the media. Like there is nothing wrong at all. If somebody's asking you a question that's a smear question in the first place and they shouldn't be asking in the first place, then you're allowed to treat it like that. You're allowed to like be kind of annoyed by it and to say something like, honestly, that's a little bit of a ridiculous question. My main concern is all these nonviolent offenders who shouldn't even be locked up in the first place, and they have their rights taken away from them and they're disenfranchised or something like that. I don't think that's okay.
Well, you know, to be fair, on the Fox News town hall, Bernie did do that a lot. Like they were, what was really satisfying there was they were incredibly out of their league. The 2 hosts who were there, I forget their names, but you know who they are. They were not qualified at all to deal with like Bernie's tactics of being able to reframe all these super obvious gotcha questions.
Yeah.
There even one was so bad where they actually got an audible boo from the audience because the question was so biased.
That shows Bernie can do it when he wants to. When he's got his guard up, he could swat away questions and he can like, you know, be dismissive as he should be, and he can take questions in the direction he wants to take them. But he's got to be willing to do that. When he went into the CNN one, and Humanist Report pointed this out, he was like, he just seemed to have his guard down a little bit, and then he was kind of blindsided by a lot of really shitty questions.
Right.
Okay. Can I just step in here really quickly and talk about why it's important to give like agency to prisoners as well for a multitude of different reasons? So first and foremost, I think we all 3 of us agree that the criminal justice system in some ways is weaponized against marginalized communities and effectively wielded as a tool to disenfranchise them and not allow them to vote, whether it be felons after they've served or ensure that their living conditions are fairly shitty, right? In some instances. Or even like across the board or even historically. So most importantly, because of that, American prison, the other thing that we can obviously agree on is that American prison conditions are inhumane, so much so that, like, I think in 1999 or 1994, Norway literally refused to send a prisoner to America because they were like, no, your prison conditions are so terrible that this would be unjust for us to extradite this. I mean, not extradite, sorry, for us to send this criminal, this American criminal, back to America, right? Like, our prison conditions are terrible. All of these factors lead to an awful recidivism rate that we have. Now, other countries, it's hard to measure recidivism, but I won't get into it. Some countries do it differently, but they still have more successful reintegration programs than we do. A big part of achieving better living conditions for prisoners and treating them in a more humane way, exclusively so that we can lower the recidivism rate and help them reintegrate into society better, is by giving them political agency, something that they absolutely deserve. On top of that, they are factored in to representation in a lot of these, in all of these states. It's basically like the 3/5 rule all over again, where legislators take advantage of their prison population and beef up their the number of people that they're representing, and yet deny them political agency.
So yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's actually the best point in favor of your position, I think.
So ultimately, just like why I believe in, giving everyone something to do and building out like a robust labor force in America, this is precisely why I think every prisoner, no matter what the crime is, should have the right to vote. It's not the violent criminals that we are thinking of, the rapists and whatnot. That is a tiny minority in comparison to the overwhelming. What?
I'm sorry. Do we have like a stat behind this here? Like the dire. Is there a qualification for whenever you're like at like the peak violence level?
I'm not certain. I looked it up when I was covering it, but I don't remember right now. But again,
okay, no big deal.
So that's a tiny minority. So when you think about the prison conditions, right, and when you think about the crime bill, for example, the things that Joe Biden had pushed, they oftentimes use the most extreme examples. But what happens when we consider the average criminal who's gone to jail for marijuana possession in the past, right? Now that number has diminished over the years, but I'm talking like 10 years ago or 20 years ago. For marijuana possession, a black person going to prison, they have to also face those terrible conditions. They are also unjustly being over-persecuted or over-prosecuted, rather, because of the way we think about criminality and because of our draconian culture surrounding punitive measures. So this is precisely why I think, in an effort to make us understand, help us understand that these are human beings and that the real problem is the socioeconomic conditions that force them into a lifetime of crime and violence and all that stuff, is way more important. And the first step there is to give them political agency.
See, I don't know. I think you made a lot of good points there. I'm not sure about that last point where I don't think like all criminality comes from socioeconomic conditions. I think in many circumstances that's true, but I also think there's just plenty of examples of just like legit broken people. You know what I mean? Like they came. Yeah. Okay. No, I think the best point is the one you made about how it's already included in the maps. Like they use prison populations and then like gerrymander districts and count them. And it's like, you literally cannot do that if you're not giving a vote. Like you're not allowed, like you can't do that. That's obvious, like cheating. So, I mean, listen, aren't there some states where they still don't even allow ex-felons to vote? Like even if you served your sentence?
Even in fucking Florida, dog, like until recently.
That's nuts. Like to not even after they serve their sentence, it's like, whoa, what are you doing there?
Yeah, I mean, it's very deliberate is what I'm saying. That's on purpose. It is by design. They don't want these people to vote. They want them to be destined to a lifetime of poverty. They want to hold them down so that there's always
that voter suppression.
Wait, sorry. Go ahead, Trihex.
I'm saying that they want that voter suppression in all regards.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just one of many other ways to disenfranchise
I got 4 minutes, guys.
Population. What?
How long?
I got 4 minutes left.
4 minutes.
Oh, dude, thank you. You've already given us fucking 3.5 hours, Kyle. That was a lot longer than I thought you were going to stay for.
I got two fastballs for you. One, private prisons. How many do we currently have in USA right now? While we're on this last topic here, do we have an answer?
Sure.
I have no idea.
Not a big deal. 4 minutes. All right. Next one. I really want to touch on. Am I saying his name right? Mike Gravel. I don't know how to say it,
Gravel.
but
Mike Gravel. Yeah.
Mike Gravel. Yeah. How is he doing right now? I'm sure you guys already know who he is, right?
Oh yeah, I do, and I actually have a pretty funny answer. There was one poll that came out where Mike Gravel was actually ahead of, I think it's Kirsten Gillibrand, Cory Booker, and like one other. So you have these like big name politicians who are running, and then you have Gravel, who when he announced, he was like, "I'm not trying to win, and I'm just trying to get on the stage to drag the debate left." And Mike Gravel was polling better than like sitting senators who really think that they're about to be president. I fucking love that. That's so funny. But having said that, I actually am kind of skeptical in general of the Gravel thing.
Well, just having him on, I would love to see him make it to. I don't know if he's gonna get the 65K individual contributions to make it to the debates, but I'd love to see him go on there and just drag the shit out of Cory Booker and Kamala Harris.
So here's what I think, though, and I'm curious what you guys think of this, and I'll listen to your answer about. And to answer your question, it's there's 128,000 Americans in private prisons in 2016. That's the most recent available data.
Wow,
but,
that's a lot.
So on the Gravel thing, I think we're finally at a place in American politics where ideas that used to be considered outside of the mainstream, especially in Washington, D.C. and centers of power, now those ideas are mainstream. And so now we have like pretty good lefties who are doing well in the race. And, you know, the front runner, probably Bernie Sanders, is like the furthest left option. And so, in other words, we have this situation in American politics today where the left is kind of like the mainstream. And then you have this guy who says, "Oh, I'm just going to run to drag the debate left, but I'm not trying to win." And in my mind, I think, first of all, I have a principled objection to the people who say, "I'm going to run but not try to win." That's like when Larry Lessig did it last time. He said, "I'm going to run and the main issue is going to be getting money out of politics. And if I win, I'll step down, but necessarily I'm trying to win." And I just think the whole "I'm going to run but not trying to win" shtick, I think it's really stupid. And I also think that by definition, whatever issue they're putting front and center is delegitimized because they're saying, "I'm not trying to win, but here's what I'm running on." And it's almost like self-delegitimization. It's almost like, "Hey, don't pay attention to me, and here are my ideas." It's the same thing. I feel kind of the same way about like Kucinich. Fair to Kucinich, he was trying to win. Like, he's running on like good policies, but then he also almost like delegitimized himself when he's asked a question about UFOs, and he's like, "Yeah, I saw a UFO." And it's like, you fucking asshole. Even if you saw a UFO, shut the fuck up and don't say it.
Okay, well, now- Kyle, get ready for the 9/11 questions for Gravel then, because he is a truther.
Yeah, I was saying Gravel's a truther.
See, that's the thing. It's like, now we have these ideas are totally mainstream, and we have candidates making strong arguments for them on stage. And then along comes this guy who says, "I'm the furthest left on stage," and "Oh yeah, isn't the far left incredibly kooky because I'm incredibly kooky?" And it's like, you know what, dude? Fuck off. We already have Bernie Sanders on stage, and we already have other candidates who are going to make leftist arguments on many issues, whether it be Tulsi Gabbard, whether it be Andrew Yang, whether it be Elizabeth Warren on many issues. So since that's the case, it just seems like a vanity project, and it just seems really silly to me. Do you guys disagree?
I haven't actually paused to consider the execution of him getting to the debate stage. I just really like the idea of him dragging people to have a more progressive leftward candidate come out of the primary Dems.
But I think it'll have the opposite of that effect, is the point I'm trying to make, and not doing a good job of doing it. Like, I think that the reaction will actually be the opposite of what he's trying to make it, because he, by saying "I'm not trying to win" and then repping all these left-wing ideas, he's delegitimizing that.
Yeah, he's tarnishing. He's making it seem like the left is too kooky by being like a person who has some positions that are kind of crazy.
Well, now on that end, though, there is some additional context here, though. Gravel is old, like he's really old, and I am not ageist here, but I know that if you think Bernie gets smeared now, who's also I think only 1 year older than Trump, if I recall correctly. Gravel is like in his 80s, and he would get annihilated from the ageist POV, and he'd have to like have a really uphill battle selling that.
He looks exactly like he did in 2008, though, when he ran in 2008. Like, he looks like he didn't age a day since then.
Well, I said they would hit him really hard with that one there.
The Gravel, truthers are probably seething
though.
right now. They love him because of his like strong, consistent anti-imperialist message.
No, okay. So, but let me be clear though. I actually do like him. I know it doesn't sound like I do, but policy issues. He was responsible for he played a big role in the Pentagon Papers thing, right, where we learned about the war crimes that we were committing in Vietnam. So
yeah,
he's kind of like an American hero. So I'm not trying to say like his whole fucking career is bullshit now. I'm just trying to say like, dude, the debate is going to be left. Like you're not changing dick. If anything, you're just delegitimizing these ideas.
Well, one can make the argument that Bernie Sanders is kind of weak on foreign policy. As a matter of fact, one shouldn't make the argument. Bernie himself admitted that recently.
The only issue, but the only issue where, okay, no, there's two issues I would say where Bernie needs a little bit of work. One of them is Israel because he's against BDS. And the other one is he's okay with drone warfare. Outside of those two very narrow things, I think he's great on foreign policy. Oh, and you know what?
Oh, Venezuela, he had like a...
that's what I was going to say. Half of Venezuela. He was correct on the main point of no intervention, but he was wrong in his focus because he did the whole caveat train of like, Maduro is so bad and so evil, blah, 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 blah. So, yeah, I mean, I think that on 90% of foreign policy issues, he's good. And actually, I know a lot of people are not Tulsi fans, but particularly on foreign policy, she has made that her like the centerpiece of her campaign.
I fear Tulsi.
She has gone super left on that in the past like 2 months, and it's actually really great to see.
Wait, before you leave, can you give me your take on why you like Tulsi? Because I'm very skeptical, and I'm very skeptical from the jump, especially because of the Dove versus Hawk narrative that she came out of the gate swinging with originally. And the fact that she has always, she always had aligned herself with like kind of militant Republicans even. And then now there's a couple other issues too, like I think it was like the casino bill. But most importantly, given the fact that she made anti-imperialism her centerpiece, doesn't that seem a little inconsistent with what she's done or what she said in the past?
No, because again, I think she's in the same category as Bernie on this issue in the sense that the point she made was basically like on the war on terror, I'm a hawk. On regime change wars, I'm a dove. And then when she goes into detail about that, her basic argument is I'm in favor of drone warfare and I'm not in favor of like regime change wars and boots on the ground and shit like that. So my whole thing on Tulsi on that front has been, if you're going to go after Tulsi for that point, you also have to go after Bernie for it too, because Bernie said in 2016, even in an interview on one of the Sunday shows, he like made a very explicit argument in favor of drone warfare in a way that was like equally hawkish to what Tulsi Gabbard said in that quote.
Yeah, no, drone warfare is bad for sure for both Bernie and Tulsi.
But that's my interpretation of what like Tulsi, because everything she said, and I've been following her campaign pretty closely for the show, and I can say with quite a bit of certainty that she is not playing around on this issue. Like, I actually have zero doubt in my mind that in the scenario of Tulsi Gabbard being elected, we're talking about like immediate troops home from Afghanistan, troops home from Iraq. Like, she's gone balls to the wall on that aspect. And overall, what do I think of her? I think she's in the top tier of candidates. I mean, Bernie's my number one. And I've been upfront about that from the beginning.
You've been championing Tulsi for a while. One could even argue that if you hadn't connected Tulsi with Joe Rogan, she probably wouldn't have this kind of mainstream success at this point.
I don't know, because he said that there are other people who brought her up to him. So I don't know, but I did bring him up, and he seemed to not know who she was before.
Yeah.
Her up, but no, I listen. Everybody knows, and you know, Tulsi knows. Everybody knows. I'm a Bernie guy, and he's my number one. But in that second tier block of candidates, you have Elizabeth Warren, Tulsi Gabbard, and Andrew Yang. And, you know, some of them are strong on certain issues, and some of them are strong on other issues. Like, I think probably the strongest on tax policy and regulatory policy is Elizabeth Warren. I think that's her bread and butter, and she knows the ins and outs of that like nobody's business. But also, Elizabeth Warren's kind of weak on healthcare because she waffled on Medicare for all, and she talks about how all the Democrats want to get to the same place, which is covering everybody. But she tries to like do an equivalence between all the different proposals, and that's just bullshit. Public option is nothing like Medicare. So you have like all these candidates with different positives and negatives. Like Yang, we went over some of the negatives of him earlier, but like Bernie has the most upsides and the fewest downsides. But it really is like pretty clearly after that, Tulsi or Elizabeth Warren, and nobody's even close. And Tulsi's making a strong, like Tulsi has not waffled on Medicare for all even a little bit, and she's been very strong. And
she stood by Bernie too originally, which I know a lot of people respect too. Like
that's true.
That's so huge for like all of the X factor intangible reasons. Like you remember when we were talking earlier with Destiny, and I was laying out you need Democrats who know how to play politics and twist arms and take no bullshit. Like that is an indication that Tulsi has that in her, where she's got that streak of like, I don't give a fuck what all of my advisors are telling me. We're getting out of Iraq. Like you could see her doing something like that. Where with Elizabeth Warren, it seems a little bit more like she could be. She's impressionable a little bit and might not have the strong courage of her convictions as much. So yeah, I mean, listen, I would say it's not like, because there are some times where people who are pro Tulsi and then they get like angry when you criticize her at all. I don't agree with that. I think there are legitimate
the Tull cells. They're in my chat. I call them the Tull cells.
So there are, but there are legitimate criticisms. But I also happen to think that a lot of the criticisms of her is really shitty. Like one of them was like the guilt by association one, where they're like, David Duke said a few kind things about her. Or,
no. I don't give a fuck about that sort of stuff. I hate that. I hate that shit. No, I'm more interested in like her going, like to me, her going to conferences and like, you know, hanging out or being invited to conferences by like very militant GOP members and things of that nature kind of scare me. I just genuinely, for some weird reason, I feel as though she has somewhat of a blind spot for like Muslims or Islam in general. I don't know. I feel like that worries me a little bit. I don't know if it's...
I don't know about that. It's possible. I don't know. But on the issue of Israel, that's one where I've gone, she's wrong about that just as much as Bernie is. If not more, actually, because she voted in 2014 during the Gaza slaughter. She voted like condemning the Palestinians for using human shields.
Yeah.
As like Netanyahu was killing 80% civilians. And of course, that's a bullshit tactic from fucking Likud that they're using human shields. Bullshit talking point. So she was bad on that. And the other thing is, and I really wasn't convinced, like I spoke to Nico House, who's a Tulsi supporter, and I like him. He's a really cool guy. And everybody should check out that interview if they haven't seen it yet. But like I still don't like, even though her voting record is totally anti-torture, I did not like her comments when discussing the issue of torture at the time that the Senate report came out. She didn't read the Senate torture report yet, but her comments were very Sam Harris-like and waffly on the issue of torture.
Yeah.
And
I don't know if it's like I have a soft spot given like all I've personally seen in the Middle East and the death and destruction caused by even like open-minded liberals who are like, oh, well, you know, some violent action is a necessity in regards to dealing with like radical Islamist terror or whatever. But like as soon as I hear that, something that's like a huge red flag for me. And given the fact that she said like, oh, I'm a dove when it comes to certain things, and then a hawk when it comes to like justifiable intervention, or when it comes to fighting terrorism, you could easily expand terrorism to fit whatever definition you want it to, as we've seen in previous administrations. So that's one area that I feel very afraid of, or like very skeptical of Tulsi's track record. And I also feel like she's definitely, is she not a Modi supporter?
I don't think she's a Modi supporter. I think that the way it was explained to me, and people could either buy this explanation or not buy the explanation, is that she has taken money from Hindu American groups. Now, when I asked people, I asked Nico, I was like, but I think the argument was the reason people were mad about that is not because they're Hindu American, but because they're right-wing Hindu American groups. And his response to me was basically like, no, they weren't right-wing groups. They were just Hindu American groups. So I don't know the details on that, but the argument he made was like, imagine if like CARE donated to Ilhan Omar, and then people were saying like, why do you support the Muslim Brotherhood to Ilhan? He was saying that that's the equivalent kind of thing we're doing. So I don't know what to make of that. All I'll say is there are some legitimate criticisms of Tulsi that I've made before and I will continue to make. But also, I think it's pretty clear that she's in the top tier of candidates, and I actually trust her at least equally as I trust Bernie, specifically on the issue of foreign policy, because she led on Venezuela. She was even better than Bernie on the issue of Venezuela. She actually led on the issue of Assange and a free press, which again, that took political balls to do that because she knew that a lot of the centrist establishment hacks were going to come after her.
Yeah, no, I agree on all of that. Yeah, that's why I said like it's very.
I do have a soft spot for her, but I also think there are legitimate criticisms, so it's a little bit of a new.
Yeah, I don't know why, but I do feel like her connection to like Hindu nationalists that run a little bit deeper than the way that it was explained to you, in my mind at least, or like the conservative groups. The CARE example isn't the best analogy because yeah, sure, CARE is not the most progressive group, like they're not as progressive as Muslims for progressive values, for example, but it would be more like, I don't know how to describe it. They are ultimately, there are still, the organization was linked with Hindu nationalists. So it's like,
okay,
it's like the difference between a Republican conservative group versus like, it's the difference between like the American Enterprise Institute versus, I don't know, like, what was Richard Spencer's think tank? Or like a think tank that is like connected.
Or something like that.
What? Yeah. Like someone, an institution or a think tank that was also like worked with Richard Spencer's think tank.
Okay, I don't know enough to really comment on the Tulsi thing, but I will say in regards to your comment about CARE, literally everybody I know from CARE, and I know a few people from CARE, they're all Bernie Sanders supporters. So I actually kind of think they are like progressive.
Oh no.
Like,
CARE is no. That's what I was saying. CARE is progressive, just not as progressive as some other Muslim groups. No, CARE is very progressive. Sorry.
Yeah, like that's
no.
why...
I was just using that as like a. It's not a perfect analogy.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
Anyway,
right,
you gotta go. I know you gotta go.
I'm stopping you now, so I can shut and let you leave because I know you're overdue.
All right, guys. This was fun. We'll do it again.
Yeah.
Hey, Haas, I might upload this later on my channel and call it like Leftgasm.
Yeah, go ahead, dude. Go right ahead. That's awesome. Well, first of all, let me just tell you that motherfucker Progressive Voice has already streamed he restreamed this entire thing on his channel probably. I don't know if he's still doing it.
True.
I love him.
By the way, did you unblock him? You gotta unblock.
No, I did. First of all, I love him. Like, but he gets annoying at times, especially when he's constantly fucking spamming in the chat. So I banned him off my Twitch chat because I told him multiple times, like, hey, Sahil, shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up. You're breaking my concentration. And you know him. He's like still very young. So
he trolls, dude. He trolls.
Yeah,
and he trolls everybody. He trolls me nonstop.
No,
too.
I know. I saw your debate gif that he made. Okay, I said gif. Everybody chill. But yeah, no, he's my nephew. So obviously, he's my nephew. I love him. But now he blocked me. He blocked me back. Yeah, I unblocked him and then he blocked me.
Oh my god, dude! Social media in 2019, man. That's all about.
It's fucking insane to me. I was in Berlin. I was in the Tegel airport. It's a bumfuck like 40-person airport, tiny as shit. I'm getting a croissant or some shit in the morning, and the guy comes up to me. Wait, hold on, I got the door. The guy giving me the croissant goes, "Why did you block Progressive Voice?"
Oh my god, that's hilarious.
Yeah,
that's so funny.
Now he's come in my chat a couple times and just like told me that like the games I play suck. You need to play something savage like Fortnite or whatever.
Oh Jesus. Yeah, once you're on his radar, it's a wrap. If you keep talking politics, there'll be 14 videos about you by next month.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
All right.
And he loves the Dragon Ball Z, so there you go.
Yeah. All right, guys, this was fun.
Right.
Do it again sometime.
Yeah, for sure, man.
Awesome.
See you around, bro.